Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into a world where no one ever asked for your birth certificate, your passport, or your social security number. Not because the paperwork was waiting at home, but because it hadn't been invented yet. It's the Middle Ages. The world smells like wood smoke and livestock. The darkness presses in on the edges of candlelight, and every sound echoes a little too much off stone walls and dirt paths. There's no digital trail, no secret government files with your fingerprints. Here, the only record of your existence is, well, you. If you just arrived in this world freshly squalling, you'd find that your identity is, quite literally, up for grabs. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this. The statistics on infant survival are enough to make even the bravest modern soul curl up under the covers, but let's say you do make it. Born to a family in a foggy English village, or maybe within the ancient city walls of Prague. You emerge into a world where your name and place are whispered in kitchens, echoed by neighbours, and stamped, if you're lucky, on a page in the church records, but mostly you're a living question mark. So before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey. Together, here on Timeless Sleep. You trudge out into the damp morning air, a child of the medieval world, your identity both completely obvious and utterly undocumented. There is no official record at the city gates, no paper proving who you are. Your arrival was marked by a scream, some hurried midwife's hands, and perhaps a brief prayer muttered by your parents. If you're fortunate, your birth is recorded by a parish priest in a book, if the parish has a book, and if the priest can write, and if mice or fire don't eat it first. Otherwise, your name exists only in the breath of your mother and father, in the gossip swirling through muddy streets, and in the vague memory of the midwife who probably just wants a cup of mead after all that noise. When you're a medieval newborn, no one's handing out certificates or sending congratulatory letters from the local authorities. In fact, your birthright is really just the right to try to survive the next winter. There is something radically freeing about it in a way. A world where no bureaucracy can lose your records, because there simply are none. Of course, that freedom comes with its own headaches. If you vanish, you vanish. You could be the lost child who appears in another town, and unless someone recognises your crooked nose or your mother's green eyes, you might as well have been born on the moon. But for now, in your tiny village, everyone knows everyone else, at least in theory. You're the newest member of a clan that has probably lived here since before there was a here to speak of. Your family's roots twist through the soil and stones. The smithy is run by a cousin, the church's bell is rung by your uncle, and the baker's wife swears she saw you first open your eyes. Even if there's no formal record, your existence is stitched into the local tapestry by 100 subtle threads, the shape of your jaw, the family's old cowlick, the odd way your left foot turns out just like your grandfather's did. Medieval identity is as much about memory as it is about anything else, and memory, as you may have noticed, is a slippery thing. In the absence of paperwork, the world relies on collective memory, and on the hope that the people around you care enough to remember you honestly. There's a running joke among modern historians. In the Middle Ages, everyone had a mother, but not everyone had a birthday. The idea of celebrating your exact birth date, let alone knowing it, was rare. Even kings sometimes got it wrong. One famous example, King Richard the Lionheart, whose own mother, the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine, might have fudged his birth date for political advantage. So if you ever feel bad about forgetting a friend's birthday, just remember, in medieval Europe you probably wouldn't even know your own. The actual event of birth, then, was shrouded in a mix of superstition and practicality. Some families tried to remember the day by linking it to religious festivals, the week after Candlemas, or on St. Swithin's Day during the big thunderstorm. The church sometimes helped, recording baptisms instead of births, because baptism was what really counted. It was the ceremony that introduced you not just to the community, but to God. And here's where things get delightfully confusing. Baptisms didn't always happen right away. Some families waited for a priest to visit, or for a safe journey to the church, or for the end of a particularly nasty epidemic. So if you're looking for a clean, neat record, well, you're out of luck. You might find yourself, centuries later, tracing your ancestry and discovering 3 siblings all born in the same month, simply because that's when the priest finally made it to town. Historians still argue whether this chaos was deliberate. Maybe parents fudged the numbers to sneak an extra ration from the parish charity, or to confuse feuding families looking for revenge. Or maybe it was just another quirk of life when so much was outside your control. Here's a little detail that would boggle the mind of any modern bureaucrat. In many rural areas, no one even had a last name. You might be known as John, son of Robert, or Marjorie from the mill. If you moved away, you'd become John the Foreigner, or perhaps take the name of your new village as a kind of makeshift surname. This led to some delightful mix-ups. There's a case recorded in a sleepy Flemish town where 3 men named Jan all married women named Caitlin, and the only way to tell them apart was by their professions and their voices. If you asked a child who their father was, you'd get an answer like, "He's the one with the loud sneeze and the red beard who mends shoes." Not exactly foolproof if you're trying to trace a family tree, but it worked. Sort of. Your identity was less a matter of paper and more a matter of presence. If you showed up to the market every week, if you sang in the church choir, if you drank at the tavern, you belonged. That's not to say it was always safe or comfortable. If you had to travel for work or if you were forced to flee by war, famine or plague, proving who you were became a much murkier business. And now we get to a peculiar little tradition, the godparent test. When you were baptized, your godparents were witnesses not just to your spiritual life, but to your very existence. If, years later, you had to prove you were who you said you were, say to inherit a field or marry someone outside the village, the authorities, often a local priest or town elder, might track down your godparents for confirmation. Imagine your fate depending on the memory of an elderly woman who, at the time of your birth, was just hoping you wouldn't spit up on her shoes. There are stories, some tragic, some darkly funny, of people trying to claim a lost inheritance, only to discover their godparent had moved away or died, or simply couldn't remember whether it was you or your older brother who had the birthmark behind the ear. One infamous case in France involved 2 sisters who swapped places after the death of their mother, fooling the village for months until a travelling friar recognised a childhood scar and blew the whole thing open. It wasn't just the poor who faced these puzzles. Even among the nobility, the lack of formal records led to all kinds of shenanigans. Pretenders to the throne popped up in every kingdom, usually with just enough family resemblance to keep things interesting. Was the Dauphin of France truly the lost prince, or just an opportunistic lookalike? Historians still argue about some of these cases to this day, digging through contradictory accounts, faded family trees, and the occasional suspect confession. And then there's the weird stuff, the bits that sound almost too odd to be true. In some villages, your right to live there was literally judged by your ability to prove you'd been born within earshot of the local church bell. Yes, really. If you couldn't name the bell's unique chime, or describe a feature of the parish, you risked being declared an outsider, no matter how many years you'd actually lived there. People love to say, home is where the heart is, but in medieval times, home was often where everyone else agreed you belonged. If you lost that communal agreement, you could quickly become a non-person, no rights, no protection, no hope of inheritance. There's something both magical and terrifying about that. Your sense of self was woven together by the memories and goodwill of your neighbours. If they forgot you, you almost ceased to exist. Of course, there were always the outliers. The travelling musicians, peddlers and rogues who made new identities as easily as changing their hats. For them, the lack of paperwork was a blessing. With a new story, a convincing accent and the right witnesses, you could be anyone you wanted to be, until someone from your real past wandered into town and spoiled the illusion. Imagine how different it all feels from today. No birth certificates locked away in drawers, No need to memorize your mother's maiden name for online forms. Your identity is a living, breathing thing, visible in your actions, remembered by your community, and always just a little bit uncertain. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your pillow and the world outside fades to darkness, just picture yourself as a newborn in the Middle Ages, nameless, paperless, but not quite invisible. Your story has only just begun, and every step you take from here will weave you a little more tightly into the fabric of your world, if only everyone else remembers to keep your thread in the tapestry. You wake up years later, no longer a newborn, but a muddy-kneed, perpetually hungry child chasing chickens through the village square. The days blur together in a tapestry of smells: fresh bread, wet grass, livestock and wood smoke. Still, you remain a person without paper, no more official than you were when you first squawked into the world. But here's the trick. You do have an identity, and it's stronger than anything you could ever stamp or laminate. It lives in the gossip, the jokes, the stories your neighbours trade as easily as they trade loaves and favours. In your medieval town, the real archives are the memories and mouths of those around you. The people who watched you stagger through your first steps, who saw you nearly drown in the duck pond twice, and who remember exactly how you cried when the baker's dog nipped your ankle. They know you better than a document ever could. Here, your identity is a living, breathing thing, constantly edited and embellished by everyone you meet. It's almost funny, really. You think of modern bureaucrats hunched over their forms, demanding 3 types of photo ID just to let you open a bank account, and you wonder what they'd make of this. In your world, the most powerful proof of selfhood is a neighbour's pointed finger and a memory that sticks. Aye, that's John's boy, the one who climbed the bell tower last Candlemas and wouldn't come down. The record is your reputation, and the archive is the town's collective tongue. This system is both utterly fragile and surprisingly robust. On one hand, it's intimate. Everyone knows your business. On the other, it's perilous. If you fall out of favour, suddenly the truth of your origins gets murky. The same mouths that once praised you for helping at harvest might mutter that you were always a little odd, never quite from here. And once the whisper spreads, it's nearly impossible to stamp it out. Imagine the scene. A dispute breaks out over a goat, or a plot of land, or the honour of someone's daughter. Suddenly, everyone's a witness. The air crackles with accusations and counterclaims as neighbours weigh in. I remember when she was born, her mother called me over to help with the birthing. Or, he's no local, his parents came from 3 villages over, and everyone knows it. Birthright, heritage, identity. None of it's written down, but all of it is argued as if it were. Historians still argue whether this system of social memory protected more people than it hurt. Was it more just to let the people speak, or did it open the door to wild distortions, rumours, and outright lies? Some chroniclers paint a rosy picture of tight-knit communities, united by trust and shared stories. Others point to the ease with which a single, well-placed rumour could destroy a person's prospects for marriage, inheritance, or even survival. And yet, for most ordinary folk, the gossip system worked, until it didn't. It's hard to overstate the sheer power of the town's collective say-so. Your lineage, your honour, your right to harvest your family's apples, even your right to stand in the market and call out for customers, all of it could be affirmed or denied by your neighbour's casual words. They were your witnesses, your ID, and your biggest vulnerability. It's almost as if you spend your life walking a tightrope strung between approval and suspicion. A single slip, a fight at the tavern, or a poorly timed joke about the miller's wife, and suddenly the whispering starts. Maybe he isn't really who he says. When that happens, the story of who you are, the one the village has told and retold, can unravel in an instant. Still, there are advantages to this arrangement. The boundaries between fact and fiction are delightfully porous. Have a dramatic story to tell? Something you want the world to believe? Start with 1 or 2 friends. Let the tale trickle through the market stalls, and soon enough the whole village remembers it too. Memory is a malleable clay, shaped by repetition, mood, and the occasional jug of ale. It's not just about confirming identity either, it's also about policing it. The community knows who belongs and who doesn't, who can be trusted and who should be watched. Strangers are immediately suspect. They are at best objects of curiosity and at worst targets for blame when a barn burns or a cow goes missing. The townsfolk close ranks, and suddenly everyone is eager to recall proof that the outsider is up to no good. Sometimes, of course, the town gossip gets it spectacularly wrong. There are cases, amusing in hindsight, tragic at the time, when someone's entire life is upended because of mistaken identity. A wandering peddler is accused of being a runaway thief simply because he shares a limp with the real culprit. Or a woman is shunned after someone claims to remember her mother was a witch. In a world without paperwork, memories grow sticky and rumours develop roots. Quirky details abound. There are villages that keep an unofficial memory council, a group of elders, usually with a flair for storytelling, whose main job is to settle disputes by recalling family histories. Their stories are often more entertaining than accurate, featuring feuds that began over a spilt stew and ended with sheep being thrown into wells. The truth, in these cases, is less important than the telling. Whoever's story sticks is the one everyone remembers. And then there are the fringe cases. Children found wandering after a war or plague, with no one to vouch for them. Sometimes these orphans are adopted and folded into a family story, given a new name and a new history. Other times they drift from place to place, always strangers, always suspect. Without someone to claim you, your identity is as fragile as a soap bubble. You learn early. What people say about you matters. If you want to ensure your place, you don't just need to behave, you need to be memorable. Good deeds help, but so do colourful mishaps, funny nicknames, or a habit of giving away the best apples from your tree. Anything that makes people smile when your name is spoken is worth its weight in gold. Of course, memory fades. The elders who once swore they remembered the day you were born eventually die, and the next generation is left piecing together scraps. Maybe that's why medieval towns are so full of legends, stories passed down to fill the gaps where facts once lived. Your own life in time becomes a sort of folklore, half truth and half tale, retold at hearths and market stalls until no one remembers what was true and what was simply convenient. Sometimes all this gossip comes to a head in a very official way. Court cases. When property is at stake, or a marriage contract is disputed, the village's collective memory is hauled out for inspection. Witnesses line up, each one offering their version of the truth. I was there when his father returned from the Crusades, brought back a scar and a silver coin, he did. Or, her mother was a baker's daughter, and I remember because the whole village smelled of burnt bread for a week. In the absence of documents, the court must decide whose memory is most trustworthy, whose word carries weight. If you're lucky, your neighbours vouch for you. If not, you may find yourself on the wrong side of the law, with nothing but your own word, and maybe the memory of your one-time heroics at the Harvest Festival to plead your case. It's a fragile arrangement, but one that's lasted for centuries, mostly because there isn't a better alternative. Historians have a field day with this. Some see in it the seeds of democracy, a world where everyone has a voice, at least everyone who counts. Others see the dangers, the way gossip can calcify into prejudice, the way the truth can vanish behind a veil of convenience and malice. Still, for most people, it's simply how things work. To be known is to exist. To be spoken of is to be real. You live and die not by the strength of your documents, but by the clarity and generosity of your neighbours' recollections. One last quirk before you drift off. In some places, your identity was even linked to physical objects in the village. The naming stone, for instance, where children were presented after birth, or the ancient yew tree under which marriages were celebrated and disputes settled. These landmarks became touchstones for memory, their weathered surfaces absorbing the stories of everyone who touched them. If you ever doubted who you were, you could always return to the stone and ask, if not for the truth, then at least for a good story. So, as you wander through your village, half listening to the buzz of conversation and the clatter of daily life, You realise that your whole world is an archive, one built not of paper and ink but of memory, rumour, and the endlessly creative energy of the human tongue. You are who they say you are, for better or worse. You're older now. Mud has become more of a permanent feature on your boots than a passing inconvenience. Maybe you're learning a craft, helping in the fields, or watching from the doorways as traders and strangers pass through your town. You might not know it, but you're surrounded by a dizzying array of hidden symbols, emblems and banners, each whispering who belongs, who has power, and who can be trusted. You've entered the world of heraldry, medieval Europe's bold, bizarre answer to passports, paperwork and photo ID. Imagine yourself walking down a medieval street, market stalls piled high with leeks and turnips, the tang of fish hanging over everything. Suddenly, a rider appears at the edge of the square. His cloak falls back to reveal a shield painted with a pattern of black and gold stripes, a bird clutching an arrow, and for good measure a snarling dog. Instantly, everyone knows who he is. He's not just some guy on a horse. He's a de Warenne, or a Fitzalan, or a d'Aubigny, a living banner of his family's history and reputation. You don't need paperwork when your very outfit announces your lineage. In the medieval world, coats of arms are more than mere decoration. They're badges of identity, family and loyalty, a kind of living resume stitched into fabric and hammered into shield bosses. Heraldic devices, as they're called, are carefully chosen, strictly regulated and fiercely guarded. Your right to a certain colour, a specific animal, or a precise pattern is as jealously protected as the deeds to your family's land. And here's a mainstream fact. In England, the practice of heraldry really took off in the 12th century, as knights riding into battle needed a way to distinguish friend from foe beneath their heavy helmets. A knight's surcoat, literally a coat over armour, became a canvas for his family's symbol. Over time, these symbols passed down the generations, changing slightly to reflect marriages, victories or losses. If your family had a lion on its banner and your neighbour had a boar, everyone knew exactly where they stood, especially when the annual drunken archery contest rolled around. But you don't have to be a knight or a noble to get swept up in heraldic fever. Towns, guilds, and even some particularly ambitious peasants tried to stake a claim in this colourful tradition. There are stories, half true, half wishful, about cobblers who invented imaginary family crests, or blacksmiths who painted dragons on their doors just to look impressive when tax collectors came around. And let's not even get started on the questionable animals, unicorns, griffins and eagles with two heads. Historians still argue whether these wild emblems reflected real claims, or were just the medieval version of putting a Ferrari logo on a rusty cart. For many, these visual codes are more reliable than any written deed. After all, ink fades, mice chew parchment, and fires are all too common, but a bold red eagle on a blue field, carefully repainted each spring, can outlast a dozen generations. You learn to recognise these symbols from an early age. They're on tavern signs, market banners, church windows, and the embroidery of every local wedding gown. There's something undeniably fun about the heraldic obsession with detail. The language of blazon, how you describe a coat of arms, is like a secret code. Azure, a bend, or charged with 3 escallops argent. That's not a magic spell. That's the heraldic description for a blue shield with a gold diagonal stripe holding 3 silver scallop shells. Each term is precise, each colour symbolic. Blue for loyalty, gold for generosity, red for military strength, green for hope. The symbolism gets wild sometimes. A hedgehog can mean thriftiness, a severed hand, justice or revenge, depending on how it's drawn. There are even rules about which colours can sit next to each other. It's a full-on medieval design system. The real drama, though, is in inheritance. If you're the eldest son, you get the full coat of arms. If you're a younger son, you might add a small symbol, a crescent, a star, a stripe, to show your place in the family tree. Daughters, unless they marry, sometimes get their own device, or their father's arms displayed on a lozenge, a sort of diamond shape. Marriages lead to wild mashups. A quartered shield, Each section showing a different family's history is like a living family tree you wear into battle. By the time of the Wars of the Roses, English knights are strutting around like walking stained glass windows. Of course, you don't always get to pick your own symbols. Sometimes a monarch or lord grants you a coat of arms as a reward, or, in a few humiliating cases, as a punishment. There's a famous legend about a French knight who boasted so much about his imaginary exploits that the king granted him a crest of a goose wearing spectacles, to be displayed at all times. His descendants presumably developed a keen sense of humour. For ordinary people, heraldry is more spectator sport than reality. You watch the great banners flutter from the castle towers during a festival, listen to the trumpets blare as a visiting noble's shield is paraded through the square, and try to guess who's won what favour based on the symbols. But there are moments when these signs become deadly serious. In times of war, a coat of arms can be the difference between safety and suspicion, hospitality and a quick trip to the dungeons. One quirky tidbit: in some towns, the baker or brewer would adopt a little personal badge, a symbol painted over the door, recognisable even to the illiterate. A boot for the cobbler, a bunch of grapes for the vintner, a golden sheaf of wheat for the miller. These house marks become shorthand for who does what and who owns which corner of the world. And if two people claim the same mark, well, you can expect an argument as dramatic as any duel, but with more flour and less blood. Heraldry at its heart is a performance. The bright banners, the painted shields, the gold-threaded gowns, they're all a way of saying, this is who I am, this is where I belong, and you can't take that away from me. Yet, for all its rigid rules, heraldry is full of loopholes and little rebellions. Some families change their symbols for political reasons, hiding old loyalties beneath new coats of paint. Others adopt new animals or add canting arms, visual puns on their names. Imagine a family named Carpenter adopting a saw and hammer as their badge, or a fox family painting, well, a fox. Historians still argue whether the explosion of heraldic symbols was a genuine reflection of family history or just a clever way to impress the neighbours and confuse tax collectors. But for you, growing up in a world where every doorway and banner tells a story, it's simply the background music of daily life. The church, too, gets in on the act. Bishops and abbots display their own arms, often packed with religious symbols like keys, swords, and crossed croziers. Monasteries develop their own banners, turning processions into a dazzling parade of colour and meaning. Even the saints get their own heraldic symbols, St. Peter with his keys, St. George with the dragon. Your local church is a gallery of painted shields, each one packed with family feuds, triumphs and secrets. The fascination doesn't stop at the borders of Europe. Farther east, rulers and warriors develop their own visual languages. The Mongols with their tamgas, branding marks, the Islamic world with intricate calligraphy and patterns, the Byzantine emperors with their double-headed eagles. Identity everywhere is about what you show and who recognises it. Occasionally, the urge to belong leads to absurdity. There are records of entire villages adopting the arms of a favoured lord, hoping to claim his protection or curry favour at tax time. Others use heraldry to stake political claims. A village that's switched allegiance paints over the old lord's badge and proudly flies the new one, hoping no one remembers last year's parade. But perhaps the strangest effect of all this heraldic fuss is how it seeps into everyday thinking. You start to see the world as a series of emblems, alliances, and hidden meanings. A red door means safety. A carved wolf's head above a shop warns of bad debt. The world is full of signals, most of them silent, all of them powerful. If you want to move up in the world, you need to learn the language of banners and badges. Every feast, every tournament, every wedding is an excuse to parade your family's colours and history. There are contests to see who can display the most dazzling arms, who can trace their lineage back the furthest, who can add the wildest tale to their family legend. It's not so different from modern flexing, only with more velvet and fewer Instagram filters. Yet for all the bluster, it's still just another way of saying, I am here, I matter, remember me. In a world without paperwork, where memory is fragile and the future uncertain, a painted shield is both a promise and a prayer. Sometimes, when you're walking home at dusk, the light slanting gold over the rooftops, you catch sight of your own family's mark, scratched on the door lintel, painted above the fireplace, sewn into your cloak. For a moment, you feel a strange comfort. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what rumours swirl or which neighbour gossips, you belong somewhere. Your family's story is written not in ink but in colour and shape, carried in processions, remembered in song, and if you're lucky, passed down to another muddy-kneed child just like you. And so you drift into sleep, banners fluttering in your mind, wrapped in the ancient restless pageant of heraldry. Your feet have grown restless. The banners and shields of your hometown have started to feel a little too familiar, and like so many in your time, you catch the wandering bug. Maybe you're dreaming of relics, redemption, or just a change of scenery. So you set out, staff in hand, pouch slung over your shoulder, joining the slow river of medieval pilgrims shuffling toward the great holy sites of the world. Santiago, Rome, Canterbury, or maybe just the nearest shrine rumoured to grant miracles. Here, on the dusty road, a new world of proof of identity emerges. Pilgrim badges, tokens and souvenirs, curious little things that serve as both memory and evidence, worn like trophies, flaunted like medals, and sometimes even used as a strange form of medieval passport. No matter where you set off from, your first challenge is being recognised as a true pilgrim, and not some vagrant looking for a free meal. There's a certain look to a traveller, the dust, the patched cloak, the awkward sunburn that never seems to heal. But to really prove your journey, you need a badge. Not a fancy embroidered sash, but a cheap metal trinket stamped by the hundreds in bustling towns, sold in markets outside every major shrine. Pilgrim badges become the unofficial ID cards of the road, a shared language among strangers, and the closest thing to a paper trail you're likely to get. Imagine standing in a market outside Canterbury Cathedral, the air buzzing with the shouts of vendors and the creak of wooden carts. Everywhere you look, badges hang from makeshift stalls, silver scallop shells for those heading to Santiago, little lead ampoules shaped like flasks for the faithful bound to Thomas Becket's tomb, sunbursts and crosses for Jerusalem pilgrims. It's like a medieval version of collecting travel stamps, except everyone can see your journey pinned to your hat or sewn into your cloak. And these little trinkets aren't just souvenirs, they're proof. You flash a badge, and suddenly innkeepers are more likely to offer you shelter, villagers might give you a bowl of pottage, and fellow travellers will let you share a spot near the fire. "He's been to Compostela," they'll murmur, nodding at your scallop shell as if it were a VIP pass. Of course, some people take this too far. There are always a few who collect as many badges as possible, not so much for piety, but just to look impressive at home. Medieval flexing right there on your chest. Here's a mainstream fact. By the late Middle Ages, the production of pilgrim badges is a booming business. Archaeologists have found thousands buried in riverbeds, lost by travellers on the journey home, often thrown in deliberately as an offering or left behind as a final watery prayer. The badges themselves are made of lead or pewter, cheap enough that almost anyone can afford one, durable enough to survive the jostling, sweaty chaos of the road. They're stamped with religious images, the names of shrines, or sometimes slightly weirder icons. One badge from Wilsnack in Germany features 3 bleeding hosts, miraculous bread. Another from Mont Saint-Michel is shaped like a tiny fortress. There's even a recorded badge shaped like a boot, supposedly guaranteeing a safe journey, and with a wink, strong legs for walking. But these tokens aren't foolproof. Some wily souls, never ones to let a market go unexploited, begin forging badges, selling counterfeit scallop shells or fake Jerusalem crosses to those too tired, or too lazy, to make the journey themselves. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of fake badges undermined the whole system, or just proved the irresistible draw of appearing pious and well-travelled. Either way, there's a kind of medieval black market. Buy the right badge and you can pretend to be a seasoned pilgrim without ever having left home. The badge system isn't just about proving you've been somewhere, it's about joining a story bigger than yourself. There's a camaraderie among pilgrims, a sense that everyone trudging through mud and rain is bound together by a common purpose. In a world where you can't prove your birth or your lineage with a document, you can at least point to your badge and say, "I did this, I was here." It becomes a piece of your identity, a claim that even if your neighbours forget your name, your journey will outlast their memories. And then there are the fringe tidbits. Some people get truly creative with their badges, attaching them not just to cloaks and hats, but to staffs, shoes, or even, if you're feeling especially daring, the hem of your undergarments. There's a story from 15th century England of a woman who wore so many badges that she clinked like a wind chime every time she walked. For her, the badges weren't just proof, they were armour, warding off evil spirits and signalling her status as a veteran of the roads. She probably also made an excellent conversation starter at medieval taverns. In some corners of Europe, the badges themselves become quasi-religious objects. They're believed to carry the blessing of the saint or shrine they represent, acting as portable talismans against sickness, bad luck, or demonic forces. People pin them above their beds, bury them in the foundation of new houses, or sew them into shrouds for the dead, hoping for a little extra help on the ultimate journey. One quirky account tells of a desperate merchant who ground up a pilgrim badge and mixed it into his wine, convinced it would cure his fever. Needless to say, his friends were less than impressed by his taste in medicine. Of course, not everyone views these tokens with reverence. There are sceptical priests and grumbling bishops who warn about the commercialization of pilgrimage, lamenting that the true spirit of the journey is lost amid the clang and glitter of cheap trinkets. They shake their heads as sellers hawk badges just outside the church doors, muttering about hucksters and idolatry. But for most ordinary people, the badge is both a keepsake and a quiet boast, a signal that you face the dangers of the road and come out the other side battered but blessed. Sometimes pilgrim badges serve even more practical purposes. They're accepted as letters of introduction in places where no one knows your face or your name. In a distant town, a badge from the same shrine as the local priest's favourite uncle might earn you a bed for the night or a place at the high table. The logic is beautifully simple. If you've suffered the same long road, you must be trustworthy. And if you're clever, you might even pick up a few extra badges along the way, just in case you need to impress or convince. Historians debate how much these badges actually proved about you. Were they a true mark of piety, or just the medieval equivalent of airport fridge magnets? Did people really use them to fake their way into jobs, marriages, or new identities? Some chroniclers are convinced that the badges mattered deeply, shaping whole careers and love stories. Others think it was all just part of the endless game of medieval performance. If enough people believe your story, then for all practical purposes it's true. Badges weren't the only souvenirs that told a story. Some pilgrims returned with tiny bottles of holy water, splinters of wood claimed to be from the true cross, or palm leaves folded into elaborate patterns. These relics, much rarer and more expensive than badges, might be displayed in the home, donated to a local church, or, if you were especially proud, shown off to all your neighbours as proof that you'd travelled farther, suffered more, and earned more blessings than anyone else. The only downside: relics were so valuable that, inevitably, counterfeiting boomed. There are tales of genuine thorns from Christ's crown being sold by the dozen, and enough fragments of the true cross to rebuild a small fleet of ships. All of this, the badges, the relics, the wild stories traded on the road, becomes part of your personal legend. When you finally limp home, sunburnt and footsore, the town gathers to hear your tales. They peer at your badges, ask after miracles and bandits, and decide in their own gossip-driven way just how much of your story to believe. If you're lucky, you'll be remembered as a great traveller, a soul both brave and devout. If you're less fortunate, your neighbours will mutter about all those badges bought at the market, and raise an eyebrow at your tales of dragons and talking saints. Even so, there's a freedom in the badge. For a moment you can be whoever you say you are, an honoured pilgrim, a wandering scholar, a penitent on the long road home. The badge is your proof, your shield, your key to new worlds and new stories. In a time before passports, It's the closest thing you'll ever have to an official stamp of experience. You'll keep your badges long after the journey ends. Maybe you'll tuck them into a wooden chest, show them to your grandchildren, or wear them at the next feast just to remind everyone, and maybe yourself, that you once walked farther than anyone else dared. The badges jingle softly, the firelight catches on tarnished pewter, and your story settles into the tapestry of your life, stitched right alongside the banners, the gossips, and the muddy roads you travelled to get here. You return from the long dusty road to find that, for all the power of badges and souvenirs, there's another sort of identity marker you can't take off or leave behind: your own voice. In the medieval world, your accent and dialect are like a passport tucked into your throat. Every word you utter quietly announces where you're from, often before you even say your name. Here, in a land without central records or travel documents, the way you speak can unlock doors or slam them shut, faster than any badge or parchment. It starts with the simplest things. You walk into a tavern craving something hot after a long journey, and you ask for bread and ale. Instantly, every ear in the place pricks up, not just at your request, but at how you make it. Maybe your vowels stretch and curl in ways the locals find odd. Maybe you use words they've never heard, or you say "thee" instead of "you," "gate" instead of "street." Within moments you're marked, not just as a stranger, but as a stranger from somewhere specific. People nudge each other, whisper guesses about your home village, your upbringing, even your social class. In medieval Europe, dialect isn't just local flavour, it's the map you carry inside your mouth. Your speech is packed with clues: a soft R here, a rolling L there, a borrowed French word, or a clipped Saxon phrase. Travel 20 miles and you might need a translator to follow the market gossip. Each valley, each town, even each neighbourhood has its own twist on the common tongue. If you're from Yorkshire, the southern English might call you rough or country. If you speak the lilt of Gascony in Paris, you're the butt of gentle jokes and suspicious glances. A merchant from Florence can walk into a Roman shop and be greeted, not with a smile, but with a cautious, "Where are you from exactly?" But it's more than just words. It's identity. Your dialect ties you to your home, your family, your history. In courts and town councils, witnesses are sometimes dismissed or discredited simply because their accent sounds wrong. Marriages fall through when a bride's family decides her suitor's speech reveals too humble an origin. Criminals are sometimes tracked not by footprints, but by asking, "Who in the area talks like that?" Of course, there are benefits to being able to read the linguistic map. Sometimes, when you need to prove you're a local, all you have to do is slip back into your native dialect. Pronounce the village name the old way, throw in a phrase that only someone from your region would know, or drop a family nickname. Suddenly, suspicious villagers nod, a little more willing to believe your story. There are times when an accent saves your life. A lost soldier stumbles into a town after a battle, barely able to walk. The locals bristle, ready to treat him as a spy, until he croaks out a nursery rhyme they all learned as children. Suspicion vanishes, replaced by hurried help and hot soup. But your tongue can also betray you. In times of trouble, war, famine, outbreaks of violence, the outsider's voice is the first thing that marks them for suspicion. There are stories of refugees fleeing a sacked town, only to be caught and questioned at the next village. Say the Lord's Prayer, they're told. If they stumble or mispronounce, they're in danger. Sometimes it's deadly serious. During the massacre of St. Bartholomew in France, the wrong accent at a checkpoint could mean the difference between life and death. And yet language can be a bridge as well as a barrier. Travelling musicians and minstrels become expert code switchers, picking up local slang and jokes as they wander from feast to fair. Merchants develop their own secret languages, blends of Italian, Arabic and whatever else works, to bargain in the crowded bazaars of the Mediterranean. Even monks, sworn to Latin, sneak their native dialects into the margins of holy books, scribbling recipes, prayers and little jokes only a fellow local would understand. Here's a fringe tidbit. There are cases of entire communities developing cant languages, secret codes used by travelling performers, beggars, or criminals to pass messages right under the noses of the authorities. These hybrid tongues change fast, morphing with every generation, impossible to track unless you're on the inside. Historians still argue whether some of these secret languages, like the legendary Thieves' Latin of London or the Romani-based Carlo of southern Europe, were really widespread, or just colourful myths spread by nervous town watchmen and sensational writers. It's not just about the spoken word either. Names too reveal your origins. Medieval surnames, when they exist, often tell a whole story. John York, Elena di Firenze, Hans der Schmied, Hans the Smith. Even if you're illiterate, you know enough to listen for the little cues that mark a stranger as one of your own. Or not. And if you're trying to disappear, nothing is harder than changing your accent, the way you say your own name. But for all the suspicion and policing, there's also warmth in the way dialect shapes medieval life. Shared speech creates instant bonds. You meet a fellow traveller hundreds of miles from home and, upon hearing a familiar cadence, instantly fall into conversation like old friends. For pilgrims, merchants, or wandering scholars, finding someone who speaks as you do is as comforting as finding a familiar meal after weeks of unfamiliar food. Historians like to debate just how much dialect mattered, whether medieval people were as obsessed with linguistic difference as we are today, or whether they simply accepted it as part of life's background noise. Some argue that, in a world without standardized spelling, people were more tolerant of variety. Others point to the endless jokes, poems, and even lawsuits sparked by miscommunication, and argue that, if anything, the medievals were more attuned to accent and dialect than we are now. Of course, language could also be weaponized. Political leaders sometimes enforced a correct way of speaking, especially in courts or in dealings with the church. The king's English, the bishop's Latin, the city merchant's French. These weren't just dialects, they were badges of class and power. Speak with the wrong accent, and you might find yourself shut out of business, courtship, or opportunity. There's even a sly comic side to all this. Playwrights and storytellers love to poke fun at the country bumpkin who wanders into the city, mangling the high-born words and causing endless confusion. One much-loved English folktale features a northern farmer who tries to buy eggs in London, only to be misunderstood at every turn. He leaves in a huff, grumbling, "They've all gone mad south of the Trent." Quirky tidbits abound. In parts of France, each village's dialect is so distinctive that tax collectors hire local guides just to interpret the complaints. In Germany, there are towns where wedding songs are sung in a dialect so old that even the neighbouring villages can't follow the lyrics. And in Italy, a young Dante Alighieri sits in Florence, crafting poems in the vulgar tongue, the local dialect, helping to turn a once humble patois into a literary language. And sometimes, in the most charming way, language is used as a test of trust. Lovers pass secret notes in dialect, so only someone from home can read them. Thieves pass coded messages in street slang, while town councils whisper warnings in the local tongue to keep out prying ears. There are even cases where rival villages use song and rhyme to poke fun at each other, their dialects forming both wall and bridge. As night falls in your little village, the fires dim and the conversations grow soft and intimate. You listen to the flow of words, each accent, each phrase, each familiar turn of speech. It's as if the whole village is humming a song only you and your neighbours know, and you realise with a comfort as deep as any document could give that you belong here. Your voice, your dialect, your half-muttered jokes, they're all the proof you'll ever need. Tomorrow, when you wake and step out into the wider world, your accent will go with you, trailing your story like a banner. Sometimes it will help, sometimes it will hinder, but always it will remind you, and everyone you meet, of exactly who you are and where you come from. And in a world without passports or papers, sometimes that's the only identity that truly matters. Morning breaks, and the village bells toll, a sound that marks not just the hour, but your very existence in this medieval world. While your voice is your passport, there is another, quieter institution humming along in the background, keeping track of who you are, who you were, and who you might become. The church. For centuries, it's the priests and scribes who keep the closest thing to an official record. They don't hand you an embossed certificate, but in their battered ledgers and water-stained books, they mark down the milestones of your life. Births, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. In the dim candlelight of the vestry, ink becomes memory, and memory becomes your proof of belonging. You might picture it, the village priest sitting at his wobbly table, scratching away at a parchment. His hands are stained with ink, his mind heavy with local secrets. He writes your name, at least as he thinks it's spelled, and the date, more or less accurate. Maybe he pauses to listen to a wren singing outside, then returns to the page to record who your parents are, who stood as your godparents, and any special circumstance like a storm raging the night you were born. He does the same for your siblings, for the neighbour's new baby, for the baker's daughter who married the miller's son. In time, his book becomes a quiet, hidden census, a secret history of everyone who ever mattered in this place. It's a mainstream historical fact. From the later Middle Ages onward, churches across Europe began keeping parish registers, first sporadically, then by official mandate. In England, Thomas Cromwell ordered parish priests to begin keeping records in 1538, an attempt in part to strengthen the king's control over his subjects. But even long before this, monks and clergy quietly maintained books of life and death, baptism and betrothal, tucked away behind altar rails and under piles of dusty vestments. Your very identity, then, can rest on a line of fading ink in a book few people ever see. And yet, for most villagers, the church register is both invisible and indispensable. Need to prove you were born here? Ask the priest to fetch the book. Need to settle a dispute about your age, your marriage, or your right to inherit a patch of land? The priest's ledger is the final word. There are stories, more common than you might think, of people journeying miles to another parish just to hunt for a single name in a battered register, hoping to win a dowry, escape a debt, or avoid being sent away as a stranger. But of course, there are problems. The records depend on the priest's memory, his diligence, and sometimes his mood. Some priests are more interested in brewing ale or tending the garden than in keeping meticulous books. Some can barely write, others spell your family name differently every time. Fires, floods, wars, and hungry mice all have their say in whether your birth or marriage is remembered for the ages. And then there's the ever-present risk of creative record-keeping. A priest quietly erasing or adding a line at the urging of a well-off patron, or a family pressing for a change that suits their ambitions. For most people, the registers remain mysterious. Few villagers can read, and even fewer ever glimpse the priest's precious book. If you're lucky, the priest reads out names at church on feast days, reminding everyone who was baptized, married, or buried that year. For the rest, it's all behind closed doors, a whisper, a rumour, a hope that when you need it, your name will be there, spelled close enough to be recognised. Sometimes these records play out in moments of high drama. A widow fighting to claim her late husband's field demands the priest open his book. A wandering orphan tries to prove her right to a family name by pointing to an entry, faded and nearly illegible, with a godparent's name as witness. A pair of lovers, denied marriage by angry parents, seek out a sympathetic priest who's willing to fudge a date, write a different name, or look the other way entirely. Quirky tidbits abound. In some regions, priests develop their own shorthand and secret codes, little marks to note illegitimacy, scandal, or dubious paternity. There are records where a baby's father is listed simply as unknown, or where a mother's name is crossed out, replaced by a question mark. Sometimes the priest's opinions sneak into the margins. This child cried terribly, or mother swears child was born during eclipse. One famous parish in rural France is notorious for its priest doodling cats, devils, and scandalous caricatures alongside the holy records. The church is not just a recorder of identity, but a maker and shaper of it. Baptism, after all, is your official entry into the community, not just of neighbours, but of the faith itself. In the eyes of medieval Europe, to be baptised is to be human, to be counted. There are even laws in some regions forbidding the burial of unbaptised infants in consecrated ground. So if your parents are late getting you to the font, or if the priest is away when you're born, your status hangs in a strange limbo. People remember those babies, sometimes with pity, sometimes with suspicion, always with stories that linger far longer than the truth. And the church's record-keeping isn't limited to the living. At your death, your name is entered once more, this time with a prayer for your soul, and if your family can afford it, a note about the candles or masses offered for your journey into the next world. For some, these records are the only proof they ever lived, a final line of ink long outlasting their flesh. The power of the priest's pen isn't absolute. There are rivalries, especially in towns where multiple parishes or denominations compete for followers. Sometimes two churches claim the same child, each with a different baptismal date or even a different name. Other times a priest forgets, or refuses, to record an event, leaving a family's identity hanging in the balance. There are even tales of ambitious priests secretly copying names from other registers, padding their own numbers to look more successful in the eyes of their bishop. Historians delight in these quirks, puzzling over mismatched records, wild spelling, and sudden gaps in the books. They argue over the true value of these registers. Are they gold mines of social history, or just unreliable scribbles full of error and wishful thinking? The answer, as always, is both. For every meticulously kept parish book, there's another riddled with mistakes, omissions, and outright fantasy. You grow up knowing that somewhere in some musty corner of the church, your name might be inked into the great book, if you're lucky. But for most of your life, you don't see it, don't touch it, and don't control it. Your identity is both public and private, known to all and yet preserved only in the secretive, flickering light of the vestry. Still, there's a strange comfort in knowing the church remembers, even if you forget. The bells that toll for your birth, your wedding, and your funeral are echoed in the inked lines of the register. The same priest who blesses your newborn child will one day record your passing. In a world of shifting memory and unreliable witnesses, the church stands as a kind of anchor, sometimes wobbly, sometimes flawed, but always there. As dusk settles, you hear the bells ring out again, marking time, marking lives, marking the countless threads of identity woven together in this quiet, persistent way. The church's records, humble as they seem, are the foundation of something bigger. A growing belief that every life matters, that every name deserves to be remembered, and that, even without passports or papers, your place in the world is written somewhere, safe from the chaos outside. You close your eyes, the sound of bells and murmured prayers fading into dreams. The ink dries on the page, the candles gutter out, but the memory, the proof of your existence, lingers, quietly, in the book and in the hearts of those who keep it. You're a little older now, a touch wiser, and you've watched enough disputes to know that sometimes nothing is more powerful than a spoken word, if it comes from the right person at the right moment. You notice how every handshake, every nod, every by my oath seems to carry the weight of 1,000 signatures. In a world where most people can't read, the contract isn't inked on parchment. It's engraved in memory, sealed with a witness, and sometimes, just sometimes, with a firm handshake. Welcome to the chaotic, highly personal world of medieval proof, where witnesses, notaries, and sheer trust form the backbone of every important agreement. Imagine a busy marketplace. The sun bakes the cobblestones. Pigs and children squeal in equal measure. Two merchants, let's say you and your neighbour, haggle over a cartload of apples. You reach a price. Instead of scribbling signatures, you both clasp hands, say the bargain aloud, and call over a bystander, perhaps the village tanner or the ever-present beggar who remembers everything, to witness it. With that, your word is your bond. The deal is done. There's a mainstream fact. In much of medieval Europe, oral contracts and witness testimony are not just accepted, they're the norm. Written agreements are rare, expensive, and often only for the elite. The Latin word notarius begins as someone who takes shorthand notes in court and ends up as the closest thing the medieval world has to a notary public, a trusted scribe, authorised to bear witness and record deals for posterity. But in most villages, the notary's job is often filled by anyone with a good memory and a reputation for fairness. A midwife, a blacksmith, an innkeeper, all can serve as witnesses to everything from a marriage proposal to the sale of a pig. Here's where things get interesting. When a dispute arises, maybe the apples weren't as sweet as promised, or one of the merchants tries to back out, the witnesses are called. They line up before the local lord or a manorial court, hats in hand, ready to swear to what they saw and heard. The story is retold, sometimes embellished, sometimes shrunk to fit the moment. The truth becomes a communal project. If enough people say it happened, then, for all practical purposes, it did. You learn early to pay attention to who's watching. The most trusted villagers, those who have always spoken the truth, who remember every detail, who've never let a grudge get in the way, are prized as witnesses. To be called upon is an honour and a burden, a signal of your standing in the community. If you lie and are found out, your reputation suffers. In a world where you are your reputation, that's a penalty as severe as any fine or imprisonment. Of course, not every witness is equal. In some towns, only men of property or certain standing can give testimony in court. Women's words might be accepted in matters of birth, marriage, or household disputes, but rarely in financial or political cases, unless, of course, no one else is available. There are regions, though, where women, freedmen, or even outsiders become vital witnesses simply because the village is small, the memories are long, and the stakes are high. A quirky tidbit: there are cases of entire communities being summoned to court to testify about a disputed boundary or an old debt. The scene is more festival than trial, with picnics and gossip as the backdrop to heated arguments about which tree marked the old property line, or who really owned the piebald cow that went missing last Easter. Sometimes, after hours of conflicting stories, the judge throws up his hands and settles the case with a coin toss or a stern warning to remember better next time. When stakes are especially high, like land, marriage, or matters of inheritance, witnesses become even more precious. A dying man gathers his friends and family, declaring his last wishes aloud so that a room full of people can swear to his intent later. Marriages, especially those involving property, are performed in public before a crowd, so no one can later say it didn't happen. Sometimes, witnesses are asked to repeat what they saw in front of the entire community, the moment frozen in collective memory. But there are written contracts too, especially in towns and cities. Charters, deeds, and legal agreements are penned by scribes or notaries, sealed with wax and stamped with intricate designs. The notary's mark, a sort of medieval signature, is recognised across regions, sometimes more trustworthy than a name, since so many people share the same few. Still, the written word is rarely enough on its own. When the parchment is presented in court, the witnesses who signed or heard the deal are called to confirm its truth. The document is powerful, but the living memory is still king. Historians still argue whether medieval people trusted written records more than oral ones, or vice versa. Some believe that, since writing was rare and precious, documents were treated almost as magic. The written contract was sacred, the seal unbreakable. Others point to endless tales of forged charters, faked seals, and lost documents rediscovered at convenient moments, and argue that, deep down, trust in people mattered more than trust in paper. The rituals of agreement are everywhere. The handfasting before a marriage, where hands are bound together to seal a promise. The livery of season, where land is granted by handing over a twig or clod of earth in front of witnesses. The custom of marking a boundary by walking its length, singing songs or carving marks on trees, so everyone present can testify to its truth. Sometimes the system fails spectacularly. A greedy neighbour gathers his cronies to back up a false claim. A witness, bribed with a round of ale, swears to something he never saw. Whole families feud for generations over who really heard what, and local courts become battlegrounds for competing memories. There are even famous cases where monks or clerks, trusted as impartial notaries, are caught falsifying records for money or influence. As one jaded scribe scribbles in the margin of his own book, "Truth has many faces, memory has even more." Yet even when it falters, the witness system is flexible. It's adaptable in ways paperwork can never be. When a travelling merchant can't read or write, he can still make a deal by swearing an oath and calling over respected locals. When an orphan needs to prove she is who she says she is, a group of midwives, godparents, or even neighbourhood children might stand up and swear to her birth and parentage. In borderlands, where languages mix and loyalties shift, the witness system moulds itself to the moment, bending rules to let the best known and best liked testimonies win the day. There are even witness rituals designed to bind the truth more tightly. Swearing oaths on relics, Bibles, or holy bones is common. By St. Cuthbert's beard, I saw it with my own eyes, as if the power of the saint will smite liars on the spot. Spoiler, the saints are rarely so punctual. In the absence of relics, people swear on swords, ploughs, or the earth itself. One Icelandic saga tells of neighbours swearing oaths while standing barefoot in the snow, believing that only the pure of heart could withstand the cold. Quirky and fringe cases sometimes blur the line between comedy and tragedy. There's a tale of a town where a pig wandered into a courtroom and, through a series of grunts, was taken as a sign from God about the ownership of a disputed field. In another village, a notorious trickster trains his parrot to repeat, "He sold the cow for 3 groats," causing no end of confusion when the bird is called as a witness at the market court. But the system's heart is trust. At its best, it forges bonds that last for lifetimes. Agreements honoured long after the original witnesses are gone. At its worst, it's a gamble. Your future resting on the memory and honesty of people who may or may not remember, or may not care. It's why, even in a world without paperwork, people work so hard to cultivate reputations for fairness, honesty, and good judgment. Be the villager whose word is never doubted, and you hold more power than any pile of documents. As the evening cools and the market square empties, you watch as villagers linger, swapping stories of the day's deals, sealing them with laughter and a final handshake. Tomorrow, new bargains will be struck, new oaths sworn, and the tapestry of trust will be woven a little tighter, a little more colourful. You realise that, in this world, you're not just a name or a mark in a ledger, you are a bundle of promises, witnessed and remembered, as real and lasting as any piece of parchment. So you drift to sleep, the echoes of voices and the warmth of handshakes settling in your mind, knowing that in the morning you'll step once again into a world where trust is everything and memory is the law. The wind whistles through the castle's old stones, and in the flicker of torchlight you notice how those around you seem to move with a different confidence. The local blacksmith and the wandering monk fade into the background, while the Lord's Son stands tall, his very presence announcing his birthright. It's a subtle but undeniable fact. Some people in the medieval world walk through life carrying a sense of inherited privilege, a right not written on paper but supposedly coursing through their blood. You find yourself in the world of nobles, knights, and those obsessed with proving their lineage without so much as a single document to show for it. How does someone prove they're truly noble in a world where birth certificates don't exist and titles are whispered more often than they're written down? This is where the true theatre of medieval identity unfolds. Family stories, physical traits, heirlooms, ceremonies, and, sometimes, outright bravado, all come together to convince the world and themselves of their rightful place in the social order. Start with the basics. In a noble family, your entire upbringing is designed to remind you and everyone else of who you are. You're trained from the cradle in the right manners, the right skills, riding, falconry, the complicated rules of who bows to whom. You're surrounded by reminders, A ring said to have belonged to an ancestor who rode with Charlemagne, a battered sword that's always called the Old Blade, a faded tapestry showing your family crest and a string of legendary deeds. But the real power lies in the stories. Dinner time is a festival of recited lineage. Your great-grandfather held this land from King Henry's own hand. Your cousin died in battle for the right king. Every triumph is retold, every humiliation quietly erased, and the family myth grows stronger with every telling. When outsiders visit, the tales are polished for maximum effect, subtly, or not so subtly, reminding everyone of your noble blood. Of course, in a world of war, plague, and shifting fortunes, family lines get tangled. There's always someone whose claim is a little less certain, a cousin raised in a distant region, a long-lost sibling, a second son who went to sea and returned speaking strange languages. This is where the rituals of proof become especially important. One of the most powerful is the public ceremony. At knighting, inheritance, or marriage, the gathering of local nobles acts as a sort of living registry. We saw him accept the sword. We watched her receive the dowry. We remember when the old lord called him son before he died. These moments are staged for maximum visibility, making the claim not just a private matter but a public reality. There are witnesses, oaths, and even, in some cases, symbolic acts. A strip of earth handed over, a chalice sipped in turn, a ring pressed into the palm, and then there are the physical traits, whispered about by old retainers and endlessly dissected at family gatherings. He has the Daubigny nose. She's got the Fitzwalter jaw. The supposed signs of noble blood are treated with the same seriousness as a royal seal. Sometimes the resemblance is a blessing, especially when the family needs a new heir, and the newborn conveniently has his grandfather's ears. Sometimes it's a curse. If a rival claims the child is not truly of the blood, the rumour can fester for generations. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In most of medieval Europe, the idea of proof of nobility was almost always about recognition by peers, not paperwork. In France, for example, proving your status as a gentleman, might require witnesses, heraldic evidence, and above all community consensus. The local nobility would vouch for you, sometimes under oath. In England, disputes over titles and land might drag on for decades, with rival branches of a family calling forth ancient witnesses, relics, and oral histories to sway the king or his judges. Sometimes proof was as simple as showing up in the right clothes, carrying the right sword, and convincing enough people to nod along. But the system was far from perfect. There's a long, colourful history of impostors, people who faked their way into the ranks of the nobility. The famous false Dmitri of Russia claimed to be lost heirs and won crowns, at least for a while, on the strength of resemblance, charisma, and the desperate hopes of their supporters. There are countless stories in which someone, usually with the help of a few loyal witnesses, reinvents their past, finds an old ring, claims to remember a childhood lullaby, and emerges a lord or lady in the eyes of the world. Historians still argue whether the obsession with noble blood really reflected reality, or was just a social tool, a way for families to hold on to privilege, to keep out upstarts, and to give everyone a sense of order in a chaotic world. Some see it as a natural outgrowth of a society where literacy is rare and stories carry more weight than ink. Others see it as a dangerous myth, one that led to endless feuds, injustices, and occasionally hilarious failures. In Spain, some nobles claimed descent from blue blood, literally veins said to be more visible through pale skin, a badge of supposed racial purity and superiority. In England, the tale of the princes in the tower still haunts historians, with decades of debate about whether the boys who vanished were truly dead, or whether one or both survived as impostors, popping up later as mysterious claimants to the throne. There are cases of entire families suddenly discovering a long-lost connection to royalty, often with the enthusiastic support of a scribe or a priest in need of a new patron. But perhaps the most persistent and sometimes comical ritual of proving nobility is the genealogy. Picture it. Endless charts drawn in cramped script, names crisscrossing, connecting fathers to sons, mothers to daughters, with the occasional question mark or dramatic arrow. These charts are fiercely guarded, updated at every family event, and used as evidence in every major dispute. If two nobles disagree over a title, the king or his council might demand to see the genealogies, sometimes with entire villages hauled in to remember who married whom and when. And just as often, these charts are quietly corrected to suit the family's needs. A marriage to a merchant's daughter is erased, a disinherited son vanishes, an embarrassing uncle is quietly converted from black sheep to war hero. The more elaborate the family tree, the greater the chance for creative pruning. Yet for all the flaws, the need to prove noble birth becomes a kind of social glue. It ties people to the past, gives them a role to play, and justifies their privileges. You see it everywhere, at feasts, tournaments, even at church, where the local lords and ladies occupy the best seats and their ancestors' effigies lie in stone, hands folded in privileged side chapels. The flip side, of course, is exclusion. If you can't prove your blood, you're not just locked out of privilege, you're often locked out of opportunity altogether. Talented commoners who rise through the ranks face suspicion and obstacles, unless they can find a noble to vouch for them, or, better yet, marry into the right family and absorb their story. The lines between classes are rigid, but the resourceful find ways to blur them, often with the help of conveniently forgotten origins or strategic adoptions by childless nobles. And in times of war, famine, or political upheaval, even the most ironclad claims can be washed away overnight. A lord falls out of favour, a castle is sacked, a family flees into exile. Suddenly, the only thing that matters is who remembers you, who will swear you are who you say you are, and whether you can still muster enough presence, enough story, to survive. One particularly odd tradition. In parts of France and Germany, would-be nobles underwent public tests of their supposed birthright. Everything from demonstrating skill at arms, to reciting long genealogies, to enduring the scrutiny of a council of elders. In some towns, the local Book of Nobles was read aloud at annual festivals, with families jostling for their place in the order. Those who failed the test might be publicly humiliated, forced to wear plain clothes, or even ejected from the community, at least until they could gather enough evidence or sympathy to try again. But even as all these rituals swirl around you, you realise something profound. The truest test of nobility is not in the blood or the story, but in the way you carry yourself. Generosity, honour, loyalty. These are the virtues everyone agrees are noble, even when the paperwork is missing or the family tree is suspect. The greatest lords are remembered not just for their birth, but for the ways they upheld or betrayed their inherited responsibility. Sometimes, in the quiet hours after a feast or a tournament, you hear the older knights talk wistfully of a time when nobility meant something, when a man's word was as good as his seal, when the line between right and wrong was clear. It's a comforting story, but you know that even then the boundaries were blurred, the truth slippery, and the need to prove yourself, over and over, was as real for the noble as for the peasant. You drift to sleep that night with the flickering images of banners, rings, and whispered family legends swirling through your dreams. You know, deep down, that in the morning you'll step into a world where blood and paper are never quite enough, and where who you are is always, in some way, up for debate. You wake before sunrise to the clang of the smith's hammer, the rhythm so familiar that it could almost be a lullaby. As you pull on your clothes, the rough linen brushing your skin, you think about how much of your life, your place, your people, your purpose, is worn right on your body. In this world where few can read and fewer still have the luxury of a written identity, your trade is your calling card. Your craft marks you out as surely as a signature, and the evidence of your life's work is literally stitched, burned, or inked into your skin. Welcome to the land of marks, scars, and symbols, the unspoken badges that say, I am who I claim to be. The day begins with a visit to the town square, a place alive with the shuffle of apprentices, the chatter of traders, and the clatter of tools. Everywhere you look, men and women carry the marks of their labour, the baker's forearms dusted white with flour, the weaver's hands roughened and calloused, the smith's arms a tapestry of burn scars and old half-healed nicks. In medieval Europe, your body is a map of your trade, a living document that tells others, without words or paperwork, where you belong. For guildsmen and skilled workers, this bodily proof is everything. In towns and cities, guilds organise much of social life. The shoemakers, the butchers, the goldsmiths, each group has its own hall, its own secret signs, and sometimes its own tattoo. It's a mainstream historical fact. Some medieval guilds did indeed use tattoos or branding as a way to identify members, especially among groups where skills were closely guarded or where mobility was high, like travelling masons or sailors. In some port towns, an anchor or fish inked into the skin is a common sight, an instant sign that the bearer has worked the seas or served with a particular brotherhood. But the marks of identity aren't always so intentional. The tanner's hands are stained a permanent yellow from soaking hides in urine and tannin. The potter's fingernails are never quite clean, no matter how hard she scrubs. For some, scars become proof of a hard-earned reputation. The baker with a jagged line on his forearm from a runaway peel, the cooper with a missing fingertip, lost to an overzealous axe. These aren't just accidents. They are, in their way, badges of honour. If you show up in a strange town seeking work, your hands are your reference, your resume. The guild marks go even further. Most every trade has its own house mark, a unique symbol, often simple but striking, carved into tools, stitched into aprons or painted on shop signs. If you're a smith, it might be a horseshoe or anvil, for a tailor a needle or pair of shears. These symbols become shorthand for trust and skill. In a world without Yelp reviews or business cards, the sign above your door tells all. Sometimes, a young apprentice receives a small iron brand, or is allowed to tattoo the guild symbol on his forearm only after years of service. A painful but proud moment that signals acceptance. Historians still argue whether these marks functioned as true proof of identity, or were just a kind of social performance, a way to signal belonging and advertise skills in a crowded market. Some think the practice was tightly regulated, especially in big cities, where guilds jealously protected their privileges and would hunt down imposters. Others argue that, outside the cities, these marks were as much about community as about work, blending into the broader swirl of local memory, reputation and rumour. Then there are the fringe cases. Sailors, always a breed apart, develop their own systems of tattoos and scars. In port cities from Bristol to Barcelona, a blue cross on the hand means you've rounded a certain cape. A swallow tattooed on the chest marks a sailor who's crossed a major sea. There's a legend in some harbours that the number of rings in a tattooed chain matches the number of voyages made. Sometimes, when a sailor is found drowned and washed ashore, these marks are the only way to identify him and give him a name for burial, if not for his family. But it's not all voluntary. For criminals and slaves, marks are often a cruel reminder of society's power. Some towns brand thieves with a hot iron, a letter burned into the flesh, a permanent sentence passed in a single moment. Runaway serfs might be marked on the cheek or forehead, making escape almost impossible. There's a strange, sad logic at work. In a world obsessed with origin and belonging, to be marked is to be forever set apart, unable to hide or begin anew. For the rest of us, the story is more hopeful. The guild hall is a place of warmth, laughter, and pride. At feast days, the old masters haul out the guild banner, unfurling the emblem for all to see. Apprentices swap tales of who got the worst burn, the deepest cut, or the oddest stain. When a master retires, his tools, marked with the family or the guild symbol, are passed on to the next generation, a kind of secular relic imbued with history. The marks aren't limited to the trades. Pilgrims on their way to holy shrines sometimes brand themselves with tiny crosses or other symbols, proof of their journey and a talisman against danger. In some places, soldiers returning from crusade or border wars tattoo their wrists or hands, a permanent reminder of battles survived and brothers lost. There's even a tale of a wandering minstrel who pricks a tiny harp into his palm before each journey, claiming it brings luck and ensures a safe welcome in any village. Quirky details abound. In one English town, a guild of candlemakers designs an elaborate badge in the shape of a beeswax hive, which members must wear on their hats every St. John's Day. In parts of Italy, stonemasons carve tiny, personalised symbols into the corners of cathedrals, sometimes hidden from sight, sometimes placed high for all to see. These marks, while small, serve as a permanent signature, a subtle claim on a structure that may stand for centuries. But the flip side is always there. If you're caught faking a mark or passing yourself off as a member of a guild you've never joined, the penalties are harsh. There are stories, some funny, some grim, of imposters who end up chased from town, publicly shamed, or even branded as liars. In one German city, a notorious charlatan spends months selling miracle cures before the guildsman exposes his fake tattoo, dragging him through the square for all to see. Historians debate whether these punishments kept the system honest, or simply pushed the cleverest frauds to ever greater heights of deception. But there's no doubt. If you want to belong, if you want to thrive, you need the right mark, whether it's a burn, a callus, a tattoo, or a carefully carved sign. Of course, not every mark is so dramatic. There's a gentler side too. The mother who embroiders a tiny lamb into her children's cloaks, the baker who shapes a personal symbol into every loaf, the shepherd who knots his sheep's wool in a pattern known only to his family. These are softer, quieter proofs of identity, but no less real to those who understand their meaning. Night falls, and as you warm yourself by the fire, you glance at your hands, reading your life in the scars and stains. You think of your friends, the mason with his tattoo, the midwife with her bundle of herbs always tied the same way, the young sailor with a fish inked behind his ear. Each carries a story, a place, a purpose, worn on the skin or stitched into daily life. In this world, your body is your passport. It tells others who you are, where you've been, what you can do, and sometimes what you hope to become. It's a comfort, a challenge, and, in times of trouble, a risk. But it's yours, and no one can take it away, not so long as you have the strength to swing a hammer, knead bread, or shape stone. And so you drift to sleep, your hands resting on your chest, your mind buzzing with memories of work, friendship, and pride. Tomorrow you'll mark the world again with your effort, and the world, in turn, will leave its marks upon you. Dawn arrives with the clatter of carts and distant shouts in languages you can't quite place. For a medieval traveller, identity is both a shield and a puzzle, especially once you leave your home turf. It's one thing to be recognised by the flower on your sleeves or the tattoo on your wrist, but everything changes the moment you cross into a new region, a new kingdom, or even just a neighbouring village. Here, where accents shift and customs turn strange, identity is suddenly up for grabs. Sometimes, you even find yourself thinking, what if you just pretended to be someone else for a while? Could you slip into a new life with only a clever tongue and a little luck? The answer is both more complicated and more fascinating than you might guess. Let's imagine you're on the road, a little lost, a little hungry, but eager to see what's over the next hill. The world in which you walk is a mosaic of dialects and identities, and no one's checking your passport at the next town gate. Instead, the first thing people judge you by is how you talk, what stories you tell, what marks you carry. You can try to blend in, mimic the local accent, borrow a badge or token, even drop a familiar saint's name. Sometimes it works, and sometimes, well, you stick out like a sore thumb. This is where things get messy, and oddly entertaining. It's a mainstream historical fact. Travellers, especially those without strong connections or proof, often tried to pass themselves off as locals, or as someone more important, just to survive. Soldiers returning from wars, refugees fleeing disaster, merchants seeking better deals, all were known to fudge the truth a bit. You hear stories of traders from Venice who become Genoese for a day, just to avoid higher tolls, wandering minstrels who try out a new accent every village, or farm hands who claim noble kin in distant counties, praying no one checks too closely. But not everyone is fooled. The people you meet are usually experts at sniffing out outsiders. It might be the way you pronounce a single word, the odd shape of your boots, or your confusion over a local saint's feast day. Children in the street might giggle at your accent. Market women ask sly questions about your uncle, who supposedly lives 2 houses down. If you stumble, the suspicion in the air thickens. Suddenly the baker who smiled yesterday is asking more questions than he's answering. Historians still argue whether medieval people were really as provincial as we imagine, whether they accepted strangers with open arms or eyed them with constant distrust. There are tales of remarkable kindness and hospitality, travellers invited to share a meal, pilgrims welcomed into homes, even the occasional runaway who finds a new family far from their origins. But there are also grim stories, towns that shun outsiders during plagues, villages that close their gates at sunset, and occasional outbreaks of violence sparked by suspicion or rumour. For some, though, the dream of reinvention is irresistible. You hear it in every tavern. Tales of men who crossed borders and became knights, women who escaped arranged marriages and started anew under a different name. There's a quirky tidbit about a wandering cobbler who, it's said, reinvented himself as a French nobleman in Flanders, convincing an entire town of his lofty birth by faking a limp and peppering his speech with mais oui, until, that is, he tried to dance at a festival and his limp mysteriously disappeared. The courtrooms and councils of Europe are littered with stories of impostors and strangers. Local leaders must constantly decide, is this newcomer really who they say they are? Sometimes they test with questions only a local would know. What colour is the church's roof? What's the name of the miller's dog who runs the apple orchard at the town's edge? Sometimes it's about physical evidence, a faded badge from a famous shrine, a scar said to be from the last war, or a token only a true guildsman would possess. But for every test, there's a trickster waiting to beat it. You learn early on that the best liars are the ones who pay close attention. They listen for weeks before making their move, gathering names, observing rituals, memorizing family trees. They slip into local jokes, echo favourite phrases, and laugh at the right time. There's a kind of artistry to it, part performance, part con, part desperate need. Sometimes the system works for the desperate or unlucky. Orphans and refugees with no one to vouch for them and no proof to offer invent stories of lost birthplaces, dead parents, heroic acts in faraway towns. Historians and novelists both love these cases, because sometimes the lie, repeated often enough, becomes the truth. If you live in a place long enough, work hard and win enough trust, people start to forget your origins. You're one of us now. Memory smooths the edges, and soon no one remembers you ever arrived as a stranger. But the shadow side is never far. Medieval Europe is a world of shifting alliances, border wars, and constant movement. There are entire professions built on reinvention: spies, mercenaries, wandering friars and merchants who change names as often as they change shoes. When kingdoms feud, even a whisper of the wrong allegiance can ruin you. And so, for every heartwarming tale of acceptance, there's a cautionary story about the price of being caught out. A quick expulsion, a beating, sometimes worse. A particularly odd case. In some border regions, villages develop elaborate shibboleths, special phrases or pronunciations that only a local can say correctly. It's the ultimate test. Can you say the word, sing the right verse, pronounce the name of a nearby stream? In the chaos of war or migration, these linguistic passwords become deadly serious. There are records of entire groups being spared or condemned based on their ability to pronounce a single syllable the right way. And yet, even as all this goes on, the borders of identity are always porous. In cities especially, the mixing is constant and creative. Italian bankers set up shop in London, Jewish scholars travel from Spain to the Rhineland, North African traders haggle in Marseille. Each brings bits of their home, language, dress, mannerisms, and over time something new emerges. The city dweller, a person who belongs not to a single place, but to a world of crossing paths. Historians love to debate whether medieval cities were truly cosmopolitan or just collections of isolated neighbourhoods. The answer is a bit of both. Some streets in Paris or Venice buzz with many languages and accents, while others cling fiercely to the old ways. A newcomer might be welcomed as an exotic curiosity, a source of news and new ideas, or shunned as a dangerous outsider, a threat to order. For the clever or the lucky, these cities offer chances to remake yourself. Guilds may accept a skilled worker, even if he has no proof of origin, simply because he can do what needs doing. Theatres, markets, and taverns become havens for those between worlds. People who slip in and out of roles, trading stories and secrets, always one step ahead of suspicion. And the records, such as they are, try to keep up. City rolls, tax lists, guild registers, all try to track who is who, but gaps and errors abound. Names are misspelled, jobs are misstated, origins are faked or forgotten. In a particularly notorious case from Florence, a young merchant is discovered to have 3 different names, each with its own trade and backstory. When confronted, he shrugs. A man must eat. Who am I to argue with hunger? It's tempting to romanticize this world of shifting identity. Imagine a freedom to choose who you want to be. But it comes at a cost. The freedom to reinvent is also the risk of always being found out. Your accent, your clothes, your habits, even your walk, all are clues, and all can be turned against you in a moment. At the best of times, you're a chameleon. At the worst, you're always just one question away from disaster. And sometimes the whole thing turns into comedy. You hear stories of a would-be prince who trips up by calling a pig by the wrong name at market, or a merchant who brags of his adventures on the Danube, only to be asked which side of the river has the willow trees, a question he can't answer. There's always a clever grandmother or a suspicious child ready to poke a hole in the most carefully rehearsed story. But there's a deeper truth beneath the surface. Everyone is always watching, always listening, always remembering. In a world without paperwork, where memory is both the record and the judge, reinvention is both an art and a gamble. Some thrive, becoming legends in their new homes. Others falter, their stories unravelling like old thread. You, at the end of a long day, rest in a strange town, the firelight flickering on unfamiliar faces. You weigh your words, mind your accent, and hope your story will hold up under scrutiny. Tomorrow perhaps you'll be welcomed as one of their own, or just as likely you'll be moving on, your identity once again slipping through the cracks, always one step ahead of the question, who are you, really? Sleep comes fitfully in a new town. The beds creak with unfamiliar sounds, and somewhere outside dogs bark at the moon, as if challenging strangers to prove their right to be here. For all the quirks of daily life, nothing reveals the stakes of medieval identity quite like the threat, or reality, of a legal dispute. One day, you're just another face in the market. The next, you find yourself standing before the town court, hoping your neighbours remember you kindly, and the judge is having a generous day. Because here, in the crowded, candle-lit chambers of medieval justice, your reputation isn't just social currency. It's your only proof that you are who you say you are, and sometimes that you even deserve to walk free. You rise at dawn, the summons still ringing in your ears. Maybe it's a property dispute, an accusation of theft, or a question of marriage rights. Maybe it's a case of mistaken identity, the kind that happens more than you'd think, in a world with no paperwork where names repeat from generation to generation. No matter the cause, you know the drill. Show up, speak your piece, and hope that enough people vouch for you. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval courts, whether they be the king's court, the manor court, or the ecclesiastical court, are places where written documents are rare luxuries, not the rule. More often than not, the outcome hinges on the trial by identity, a process where the truth of your story is weighed in the collective memories and spoken words of your peers. It's a strange, almost theatrical process. The judge, maybe a lord, maybe a churchman, maybe a handful of respected elders, listens as neighbours, relatives, and sometimes total strangers take turns telling what they know about you. Did you really buy that pig last summer? Were you in the next town when the barn burned down? Are you, as you claim, the daughter of old Thomas who died in the plague? Each voice is a thread in the tapestry of your life, woven in public, debated, sometimes unravelled right in front of you. The most crucial role is played by the witnesses. Your standing in the community, how honest, reliable, or suspicious you seem, becomes its own form of testimony. He's always paid his debts, one neighbour might say. I've never known her to lie, another chimes in. But the same system can cut both ways. She keeps to herself, doesn't mix much, someone murmurs, and suspicion settles like a shadow. Your past kindnesses, your old feuds, the jokes you told at last year's festival, all are suddenly evidence for or against you. Sometimes, in the absence of clear witnesses, the court turns to physical proof. You might be asked to show your guild mark, the scar from an old wound, a birthmark your mother swore was in the shape of a fish. If you're lucky, these are enough. If not, you may face the old and unsettling ordeal, trial by fire, water, or combat. Few look forward to these outcomes for obvious reasons, but in the absence of paper records, people are always looking for something, anything, concrete. Historians still argue whether this reliance on reputation and memory made medieval justice more fair or less. On one hand, the tight-knit nature of small towns means that everyone knows each other's business. Lies are harder to sustain. On the other, grudges fester, and the risk of personal vendettas is real. There are cases of people losing land, freedom, or even their lives simply because too many neighbours bore old resentment or were eager for a little excitement. Sometimes the system is almost comical. There's a case in a Flemish town where two men named Peter van den Berg were accused of the same crime. With no birth certificates to fall back on, the court summoned half the town to testify which Peter was which. The tie was finally broken when an old woman remembered that one Peter snored like a bull and the other was scared of geese. It's said the snorer went free and the goose-fearing Peter did not fare so well. Yet the process could also be deadly serious. In accusations of theft, witchcraft or heresy, crimes that could end in exile, mutilation or worse, being able to prove your identity was a matter of life and death. If you couldn't, your chances depended on the willingness of others to step up and risk their own reputations for your sake. The power dynamic is always there. Who will risk angering the lord, the priest or the mob to stand by your side? Quirky and fringe cases are everywhere. One much-repeated tale tells of a town where a woman claimed to be the long-lost daughter of a wealthy merchant. Suspicious, the court asked her to identify the family's secret song, a lullaby sung by her mother, known only to the true child. She hummed a tune, and tears flowed. The town was convinced, until, years later, another daughter arrived, humming the very same melody. The merchant, exasperated, declared both real enough and left his fortune to the church instead. But sometimes the law made room for the unknown. There are accounts of strangers who could not be identified but were nonetheless welcomed, so long as no one spoke against them and they found 2 or 3 people willing to vouch for their honesty. This created an odd blend of caution and opportunity. The door to a new life was always open a crack if you could only find a friend, a godparent, or a forgiving soul willing to take a risk on your behalf. One odd custom, particularly strong in parts of Germany and Switzerland, is the swearing of the oath. If accused, you could summon a group of compurgators, basically character witnesses, who swore on holy relics that they believed you to be innocent and truthful. If you could gather enough hands, the court would acquit, reasoning that so many upstanding people wouldn't risk their souls for a liar. Historians debate how effective or just this practice was. Sometimes the real crime was simply not knowing enough trustworthy people. Sometimes identity is settled not by the facts, but by sheer spectacle. There are records of public contests where the two sides must produce the most impressive witnesses, stories or proofs, including, on one memorable occasion, a cow that was said to know its true owner and would only follow the right person home. The village watched, bets were placed, and the outcome became folklore, retold at every feast for years to come. Legal disputes over marriage are especially tangled. With no paperwork, proving a marriage could depend on witnesses recalling the words spoken, the clothes worn, the meal served. Did the couple exchange rings? Did they share a cup of wine? Was the wedding feast held on a feast day or a weekday? In some cases, a couple's entire future hangs on whether the baker or the brewer remembers what he saw, and, just as important, what he wants to remember. Sometimes legal trouble comes not from what you've done, but from what you cannot prove. A traveller accused of vagrancy, a widow trying to claim her late husband's tools, an apprentice seeking the right to open his own shop, all face the same question. Can you convince the court, the council, or the congregation that you are who you say you are? Without birth records or written deeds, even the honest sometimes fail. The system has its defenders. Some argue that the public nature of these proceedings, the need to air disputes before a crowd, was a check on injustice. If everyone knows your business, the chance for corruption is less. At least that's the theory. Others point out that public shaming, mob pressure, and the unpredictable swing of village sentiment could make justice a cruel and capricious thing. Still, you do your best to prepare. Before court day, you visit friends, remind them of old favours, perhaps even slip a coin to a key witness. Nothing too obvious, just a token of friendship. You rehearse your story, making sure it matches what people already believe about you. You listen closely as others speak, trying to gauge which way the wind is blowing. In a system like this, truth is only half the battle. Memory, rumour and sympathy matter just as much. Q. As dusk falls and the court empties, you exhale, heavy with relief or worry, knowing that tonight your fate was decided not by papers or fingerprints, but by the voices and memories of the people who share your world. The law here is as much about belonging as it is about right and wrong. You step back into the night, your heart pounding, aware that, in this place, identity is always public, always vulnerable, and always, one way or another, a matter of trust. A new day, a new set of bargains. In medieval life, commerce is everywhere, humming through streets and fields, pulsing in every fair and market. For most people, the business of buying and selling is more than just a way to survive. It's the beating heart of the community. And in this cash and barter world, coins and trade become something more than simple tools. They're a hidden form of identification, a subtle proof of who you are and how you fit into the intricate puzzle of medieval society. You're in the market square, the morning chill still clinging to the cobbles, your basket full of hopes and a handful of battered coins. The stalls are a blur of colour, onions piled like miniature suns, loaves of bread with crusts as hard as armour, lengths of homespun cloth, a dizzying array of trinkets, pots, and livestock. Everywhere, hands reach out, traders from the next parish, old women hawking cheese, peddlers shouting the virtues of their foreign wares. There's no written contract here, no receipts. Instead, trust and reputation, the rattle of coins, and a keen eye for faces and tokens. It's a mainstream historical fact. In most of medieval Europe, coins themselves carry clues to a buyer's identity. Local mints produce currency stamped with the face of a lord, a king, or the crest of a city. To pay in the wrong coin is to announce yourself as an outsider, sometimes as a foreigner. A London penny might be accepted in York, but with a suspicious squint. A French denier is likely to provoke laughter or anger unless you're in a cosmopolitan port or trading post. Merchants become experts at reading coins, their weight and shape, their wear and shine. It's not just about gold or silver, but about where that metal has travelled, whose pocket it left last. Coins, in a way, become your silent references. The money you spend says something about where you've been, who you know, and whether you're to be trusted. Sometimes, carrying the right coins, or just as crucially the right tokens, marked by guilds or local authorities, is the difference between getting a fair deal or being fleeced, welcomed or watched. The exchange is a dance, half spoken, half observed. If you hand over a battered coin from your own region, the stallholder might smile and ask after your mother, or grumble about last year's harvest. If you fumble in your purse and produce a coin they don't recognise, the tone shifts. A wary look, a pause, a quick question about where you come from. Historians still argue whether medieval commerce was a true meritocracy, where anyone could buy and sell regardless of origin, or whether it simply replaced old prejudices with new ones. Some records show travelling traders welcomed for their goods and news, even as their coins were eyed with suspicion. Others suggest that, at least in closed communities, outsiders found it almost impossible to trade unless someone local vouched for them, or they carried special markers, iron rings, wooden tokens, stamped pieces of lead, given by the market authorities as a form of temporary citizenship. Quirky details make the story even richer. In some Italian towns, the most trusted merchants are allowed to issue their own market tokens, good for bread, cheese, or a mug of wine at any stall. In the great trade fairs of Champagne, travellers receive tiny lead or pewter badges when they pay the toll at the gate. Lose the badge, and you'll find yourself hounded out by the market bailiffs before you can even buy an apple. In port cities, some foreign merchants band together, pooling their coins and using shared markers to prove their identity, an early makeshift bank account centuries before modern banking. For the regular folk, it's not just about buying and selling, it's about belonging. The way you haggle, the stories you tell while weighing a chunk of cheese, the jokes you share with the butcher, all these become a kind of social currency. Your face becomes as recognisable as your coins. Regulars get better deals, a little extra thrown in, sometimes even credit, until next market day. Strangers, unless vouched for, pay full price, sometimes double if the mood takes the cellar. But what happens when things go wrong? Suppose you're accused of passing false coins, or you can't pay a debt or a deal sours over a disputed weight or a missing chicken. The market courts swing into action, and here again money is your calling card. Merchants testify to your honesty or your sharp dealing. The type and quality of coins in your purse can speak for or against you. Sometimes, in the absence of witnesses, a merchant's long relationship with local traders becomes the strongest evidence. I've seen him pay in fair coin every week for a year. I trust him. Some towns have quirky homegrown systems for handling money and identity. In Bruges, it's said, you can tell a trader's origin by the way he counts his change. Some start with the largest coins, others with the smallest, a habit picked up in childhood and hard to shake. In London, the watermen who ferry people across the Thames are famous for their oath coins, tiny slugs of lead stamped with the ferryman's mark, good for one crossing and only ever given to regulars. Try to use one as a stranger, and you'll find yourself on the wrong side of the river, with the oarsman laughing as he rows away. Historians delight in these little systems. Some argue that the endless variety of coins and tokens was a source of strength, giving people flexibility and creative ways to prove themselves. Others point out that it left the poor and the unconnected vulnerable, always at the mercy of those who could say, "This coin's no good," or "I don't know you, so your word means nothing." Fringe cases abound. There are stories of clever forgers and coin clippers, always trying to pass off false or shaved coins. Some manage for years, their identities built on a foundation of fraud, until, inevitably, a sharp-eyed merchant or a suspicious guard catches them out. Punishments are harsh: public shaming, banishment, or worse. The message is clear: trust and identity are precious, and those who violate them are dangerous to the whole community. Yet even with all this risk, money is a kind of magic. With the right coins, you can move between worlds. The peddler from Bohemia trades with the cloth merchant from Flanders, who buys a silver brooch from a Genoese sailor, who spends his winnings in a French tavern. Each transaction is a handshake, a silent agreement. For this moment, at least, you're one of us. In the background, the church and local authorities watch with keen interest. Tithes and taxes are often collected at the market, and sometimes special market days are called not just for commerce, but for the Lord's benefit. The record keepers, priests, bailiffs, scribes, pay close attention to who buys what, who pays in which coins, and who always seems to have friends to vouch for them. For some, success in the market is the path to local respect, even minor power. For others, it's a chance to disappear, to change coins, change names, slip away to the next town and start again. Odd rituals still survive, even in the most bustling towns. In some places, deals are sealed with a handshake over a pile of coins, then a shared drink, a final public confirmation of trust. In others, market elders keep lists in their heads, if not on paper, of trusted regulars, newcomers, and known cheats. When disputes arise, these informal networks become more important than any rulebook. "He's good for it," says one. "She's cheated before," warns another. The group decides, the deal stands or falls. You spend the day trading, laughing, counting and recounting your coins. You watch as others move through the stalls, some greeted by name, others eyed with caution. You realise how much identity is bound up in this world of buying and selling, not just in the marks on your money, but in the way people remember you, the stories they tell about you, the little tokens and habits that add up to a reputation. As dusk falls, you tuck your remaining coins into your purse, satisfied with your day's work. The market empties, but the bonds formed linger on. Tomorrow, the coins will change hands again, the jokes and bargains will start anew, and the delicate web of trust, memory and trade will hold the village and you together for one more day. You drift off, the sound of coins clinking softly in your dreams, knowing that in this medieval world, every transaction is more than a trade. It's a subtle reminder of who you are and a quiet promise that you belong. The day dawns grey and misty, and you're struck by a truth that's as old as the first weaving loom. What you wear tells a story. In a world where people judge first by sight and only later by words, clothing is one of the sharpest markers of identity. The fabrics, colours, trims and little details of your dress don't just reveal how much you own. They signal where you're from, who you serve, how you make a living, and sometimes even who you hope to become. There are no photo IDs, no printed forms to show, but step into a medieval market or a crowded church, and everyone is reading you as surely as a book. You pull on your everyday tunic, coarse but sturdy, belted at the waist. Maybe you have a second, finer one for feast days, dyed blue or green if you're lucky, with sleeves a little longer than the fashion from last year. In your village, everyone knows this tunic. They know your mother's needlework at the collar, recognise the patch from the time you tore it climbing the elder tree. Here, clothes are as personal as a fingerprint, but venture beyond your town and suddenly your clothes become both your defence and your vulnerability. The dye of your cloak, the cut of your shoes, the way you wear your hood or cap, they all tell stories to sharp-eyed strangers. In medieval society, fashion is the first form of identification, a living code enforced not just by custom, but by law. A mainstream historical fact. Throughout the Middle Ages, sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what. These rules, enforced by kings, city councils, or even local lords, were meant to keep everyone in their place. Only nobles could wear certain colours, scarlet, royal blue, deep purple, or adorn their cloaks with fur and gold. Merchants might be allowed fine fabrics, but without the trimmings. Peasants and labourers were strictly limited. No silks, no velvets, no jewellery except perhaps a bit of bronze or pewter. It wasn't just about snobbery. To break the sumptuary laws was to risk a fine, a public shaming, or worse. So, as you move through the crowd, you pay attention not just to who is wearing what, but how. The baker's apprentice hurries by in an old brown tunic. Plain, functional, instantly readable. The squire in the street shows off his new boots, clearly a gift from his lord, the soft leather a privilege above his rank. The priest's dark robe sets him apart, and the merchant's wife signals her rising status with just a hint of imported lace at her cuffs. It's a constant, silent conversation, a performance played out with every thread. But within the rules, there's endless creativity. You see it in the patterns embroidered on a woman's apron, a style known only in her home valley. You see it in the buttons carved from antler, the ribbons dyed with homegrown woad, the capes trimmed with a fur only found in the next shire over. Clothes become family, region, profession, ambition, all stitched together. In some villages, a mother's style of hemming is so distinctive that lost children are identified by the shape of their shirt's edge. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws actually worked, or whether people found endless ways to bend and break the rules. Some lords grew rich finding the upstarts, who dared to wear a forbidden belt or scarf. Others turned a blind eye, knowing that ambition and pride are as much a part of life as hunger and hope. And sometimes the boundary between costume and identity is even blurrier. Travelling minstrels and players use clothing to create new selves, slipping into noble garments one day, donning beggar's rags the next. Pilgrims are instantly recognisable by their patched cloaks, wide-brimmed hats, and the badges of the shrines they've visited. Knights parade their colours, banners, and crests in tournaments, their identities literally woven into their surcoats and embroidered on their pennants. There's a fringe tidbit about the sumptuary rebels, those who make a living out of testing the limits. In Italy, records tell of tailors who invent clever tricks to hide expensive linings, or insert flashes of forbidden colour beneath the folds of a cloak, so a noble's daughter can show off just a little extra at a dance. In Paris, hat makers compete to create the tallest, brightest headwear, each daring their clients to flaunt a bit more than the law allows. And in London, the city council tries, again and again, to ban shoes with long curled toes, only to see the fashion return every generation, sharper and curlier each time. But even the rebels know that, in the end, clothing can be evidence. In court, people are often asked to describe what a suspect was wearing. A lost child is identified by a strip of fabric. A runaway serf hoping to pass as free is caught by the humble dye of his shirt or the rough weave of his homespun pants. And if you're lucky enough to be promoted, from peasant to craftsman, from craftsman to guildmaster, your first purchase is often a new cloak, a visible upgrade that signals your arrival in a new world. Sometimes clothes are used as a test. A merchant suspected of passing himself off as a noble might be challenged to wear the heavy, jewelled gown of a lord and walk the length of a hall. If he falters, the charade is up. In one German town, a festival involves villagers switching costumes for a day. The butcher wears the priest's vestments, the blacksmith dons the tailor's coat, the laughter both a relief and a warning. Identity is only as solid as your audience's willingness to play along. Quirky stories abound. In some places, colour itself becomes a password. There are whole towns where only widows wear green, and where a man in a red hat is immediately recognised as the village crier. In Florence, a woman's headscarf can reveal not just her marital status, but whether she's from across the river or the other side of the square. In the English countryside, shepherds are known by their cloak's special fastening, a button carved in the shape of a local flower. Of course, clothes are not always about pride. They can be about shame too. Punishments for certain crimes might include the forced wearing of a special hat or a garish tunic, marking the wearer out for ridicule. In some places, a debtor must wear an inside-out coat until he pays his dues, or a thief is forced to parade in a donkey's tail. Even outside the law, gossip is quick to mark the oddly dressed. The widow who keeps wearing mourning black long after her year is up, the young man who dares to sport a foreign doublet. Yet, for all their power, clothes are also a canvas for hope. When a girl sews a new ribbon into her Sunday dress, or a young craftsman buys his first pair of dyed hose, they're claiming a little more space in the world. The act of putting on new clothes, however humble, is a way of saying, I am changing. I am more than what you thought. There's a lovely secret language too in the hidden linings, the tiny charms sewn into hems, the bits of ribbon tied in a lover's knot. Mothers pass down sewing tricks, fathers teach sons how to polish boots or press a crease, and every family has a story about the lucky shirt or the unlucky belt. You come to realise that in a sense the clothes wear you as much as you wear them. They shape how you move, how you're seen, how you dream. Night falls, and as you fold your tunic and lay it beside your bed, you think about the countless judgments, jokes, and moments of pride bound up in each thread. Tomorrow you'll dress again. Maybe in your best, maybe in your work clothes, maybe in something borrowed or patched or new. Whatever you choose, you'll be telling the world your story, even if you never say a word. In the medieval world, fashion is more than vanity or comfort. It's proof, public and private, subtle and loud, of who you are, where you come from, and how you hope to be seen. In the end, your clothing is your first defence, your final witness, and sometimes your only friend. Sleepy morning light spills over uneven rooftops and into windows smudged with the smoke of 100 hearths. You lie there, drowsy and warm, realising that even your name, so seemingly solid, so essential, can be as slippery as the dreams you're just leaving behind. In medieval Europe, a name is a strange shifting thing. More than a label, less than a guarantee, and always vulnerable to confusion, jokes, accidents, or deliberate deception. Sometimes it anchors your identity. Sometimes it tangles you in the world's oldest game of mistaken identity. You pull on your tunic, recalling all the ways people have called you, your given name, your son of name, the nickname that stuck after you fell in the duck pond, and that one unfortunate alias from the Midsummer Fair. In your world, names are handed out as much for convenience as for lineage. There are only so many first names to go around, after all. If you're an Englishman, chances are high you're named John, William or Marjorie. If you're French, perhaps a Jean or a Pierre. Your surname, if you have one, says something about your father, Johnson MacDonald, your work, Miller, Baker, Fletcher, your home, Hill, Brook, Woods, or a long-forgotten quirk, Short, Strong, Merriweather. It's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval people did not have fixed surnames in the way modern societies do. Names could change over a lifetime, reflect temporary circumstances, or be reinvented when you moved to a new town. If you relocated for work, you might become John of York instead of John the Smith, or Agnes at the Well instead of Agnes Turner. This fluidity is practical. Nobody expects you to haul a passport or papers, but it's also a source of endless confusion. The problems begin in childhood. If there are 4 Johns in your village, each one is known by a tag: John the Tall, John with the broken nose, John Baker, John by the mill. Sometimes the tags stick for life. Sometimes a single event or joke reshuffles them. You might start out as young John and become old John as the years creep up on you. Maybe you marry a woman with a strong reputation and become known as John Maud's husband, a mark of pride or exasperation depending on Maud's temper. Nicknames too are everywhere, affectionate, mocking, mysterious. Some are gentle. Little Meg, Red Robin, Goodwife Chatter. Others bite, Blathering Bill, Pinch Penny, Clever Dick, said with more than a trace of irony. Sometimes a nickname is your only name, and it's passed down through those generations like a stubborn family curse. And then, of course, there are the mistakes. A new scribe at the manor court misspells your name, and suddenly you're John instead of John. The priest gets flustered at your child's baptism and writes Agnes instead of Alice. A wandering friar forgets your last name entirely, so you become Roger, that man who owed the abbey a chicken. Sometimes the mistakes are small. Sometimes they set off generations of confusion, with whole families feuding over who really owns a certain field or who can rightfully claim a dowry. There are legendary cases of mistaken identity, both tragic and comic. There's the tale of 2 women named Margaret, each married to a John Fletcher, who swap villages to escape unhappy marriages, only to return home and find their husbands remarried and everyone unsure who belongs to whom. There are stories of long-lost sons returning home and being mistaken for bandits, or in rare moments of good luck, inheriting property from some distant dead cousin purely because the names lined up. Some of the most dramatic legal disputes begin with a name. Inheritance battles hinge on whether Robert, son of William, is the same as Robert at the Crossroads. When property is passed down through the female line, names can vanish entirely, replaced by a husband's, a father's, or even a village's. If you're accused of a crime, you might try to disappear into the next county, change your name, and hope no one recognises your voice or your limp. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There's always someone, an old midwife, a sharp-eared priest, a neighbour with a long memory, ready to unravel the disguise. Quirky tidbits surface all the time. There's a story of a notorious trickster who earned a living by exploiting name confusion, walking into distant markets, claiming to be Simon the Dyer, and collecting debts owed to a man he'd never met. By the time the real Simon arrived, the trickster was long gone, and the market abuzz with gossip. There's also the curious tradition of name days, celebrated in many regions with as much fanfare as birthdays, which, as you recall, are seldom precisely known. On your name day, you're the honoured guest, whether you're Margaret the Tall or Margaret the Tanner's daughter, and everyone has a laugh at your expense, telling stories about all the Margarets who have come and gone before. Historians love to debate how much this confusion really mattered. Some argue that the fluidity of names was a source of resilience, letting people blend into new communities and adapt to change. Others see it as a vulnerability, a crack in the armour of medieval society that allowed fraud, theft, and injustice to flourish. What is clear is that, without paperwork, a name is both a shield and a risk. There's also the awkward problem of noble names and imposters. If you're ambitious or desperate, you might take the name of a distant noble family and hope no one checks too closely. The risk is real. Noble lineages are fiercely guarded, and being caught out could mean exile, shaming, or worse. But if you're clever and lucky, you might ride a new name all the way to comfort or power. Mistaken identity is not always accidental. Lovers use secret nicknames in letters to avoid prying eyes. Outlaws adopt new names every town. Pilgrims travelling to distant shrines sometimes take on holy names for protection. The Church itself complicates matters, assigning Latin versions of your name in the baptismal register, or Latinizing it for official documents. So William becomes Gulielmus, Mary becomes Maria, and good luck untangling that when the court is debating who inherited the cow. Even within a single household, confusion can reign. Brothers named after their father and grandfather might go by their middle names or nicknames, but a visiting scribe doesn't know that. The church bells ring out a wedding for Alice, daughter of John, but which Alice and which John? One practical solution is to name children after saints' days or festivals, Martinmas, Easter, Michaelmas, but that only works until there are 3 Martins on the same street. And sometimes you just want to disappear. If the tax collector comes knocking or an angry lord is searching for a runaway, it's easy to become the new man from the next village, or the shepherd from the hills. You hide in plain sight, your old name quietly dropped, your new one adopted with a shrug and a wink. All of this creates a world where identity is always a conversation, never a statement. You are who people say you are, until you're not. You can be known by one name at home, another at the fair, a third at church, and a fourth in the next county. Sometimes it's liberating, sometimes it's lonely. Night falls, and as you gather with friends at the tavern, the laughter rises, and so do the stories. Stories of mistaken identity, wild nicknames, and the occasional lucky windfall that comes from being mistaken for someone else. You catch yourself wondering who you might have been, if things had gone differently, if you'd been named after a different saint, or if that old scribe hadn't written Robin instead of Robert. In the flickering firelight, everyone's stories blend together, and for a moment you realise that maybe the confusion is part of what makes life so endlessly interesting. In the medieval world, names are never just names. They're keys, riddles, jokes, camouflage, and sometimes, for a lucky few, golden tickets to a new beginning. As the moon rises, silvering the thatched rooftops and glinting on church spires, you're reminded that, for all the lively colour and daily bustle of village life, identity can also be a matter of life and death, especially at the edges of the map, in the shadows between communities, or at the borders where the known world ends and the other begins. Tonight your thoughts drift toward those who fall outside the neat categories, the countless souls who exist in limbo, the strangers, the outcasts, the invisible and the in-between. You listen as the tavern's laughter fades, replaced by the low hum of stories shared in corners, tales of outlaws, exiles, refugees and wanderers. These are people for whom the question, "Who are you?" is never easy. They are those for whom belonging must be claimed, not assumed, and for whom identity is an ongoing negotiation, never a settled fact. You think first of the stranger, sometimes feared, sometimes welcomed, but always watched. In medieval Europe, a stranger is anyone not known to the community, anyone who cannot point to a father, a godparent, or a neighbour to vouch for them. It's a mainstream historical fact. Many towns kept strangers' books, or alien registers, crude lists of those allowed to settle temporarily, pay taxes, or trade. Sometimes the stranger is a craftsman, drawn by the promise of work, sometimes a pilgrim, a refugee from famine or war, or a Jewish merchant passing through on business. Life for the outsider is precarious. You are defined not by what you say, but by what others say about you. Can you find someone, anyone, to stake their reputation on your good conduct? Without a witness, a sponsor, or a host, you may be barred from the market, denied access to the guild, or even turned away at the town gate. In some places, strangers must wear a special token, a badge, a coloured hood, a patch on the shoulder, or pay extra tolls for every night they stay. Yet for all the suspicion, medieval towns need outsiders. They need new blood, new skills, fresh stories and connections to distant markets. Merchants and craftsmen who prove themselves honest and valuable can over time become locals. The process is slow and never guaranteed. One false step and you are other again, as easily as a coin slips from a hand. Historians still argue whether medieval society was more open or more closed to outsiders. Some cities, like Venice or Lubeck, grew rich on waves of immigrants, offering citizenship in exchange for taxes, military service, or a bribe. Others, especially in times of fear, plague, war, religious tension, retreated into suspicion and exclusion, blaming every misfortune on newcomers or minorities. In England, the cry of "foreigner" could be enough to start a riot. In Spain, the wrong accent could turn suspicion into violence. Then there are those pushed even further to the margins. Think of the Jews, officially tolerated in some towns, expelled from others, always living on a knife edge of protection and risk. They have their own customs, laws and synagogues, often clustered in small, tightly knit quarters, ghettos centuries before the word was coined. Their identity is policed not just by outsiders, but by their own leaders, who keep careful records of births, marriages, and debts, long before most Christians do. These records, some of the earliest community archives in Europe, are both shield and shackle, proof of belonging for those within, but dangerous evidence for those without. Or think of the Romani people, called Egyptians, Tatars, or travellers, depending on who's talking, who move constantly, never fully accepted, always at risk. They are experts at reinvention, masters of disguise, storytellers, musicians, metalworkers. Their names, languages and customs shift with the road, making them both invisible and unforgettable. Laws spring up across Europe to control them, bans on camping, on music, on horse trading, on simply existing without settled abode. Yet still they persist, building networks of kin, exchanging secret signs and stories that bind them together wherever they go. Quirky tidbits surface everywhere. In some regions, wandering healers and cunning folk, herbalists, bone setters or midwives, walk the line between accepted and outlaw. They are known, but always a little apart, welcomed when needed, blamed when things go wrong. A healer may be called to save a child 1 month and accused of witchcraft the next. The price of standing on the border of identity is a constant, uneasy balancing act. Then there are the fugitives and outlaws, men and women whose very existence is denial of community, whose names are struck from the village memory. To be declared an outlaw is, in effect, to lose your identity. Your property is forfeit, your name erased from a legal record, your friends forbidden to shelter or feed you. You might take a new name, find a distant town, hope to pass for a stranger, but the past always lingers, and someone, somewhere, remembers. There's also the case of foundlings and orphans, those with no parent, no kin, no proof of origin. Monasteries and convents keep ledgers of the children left on their doorsteps, noting scraps of cloth or jewellery left as tokens of future recognition. These tokens are precious, sometimes the only link a child has to a vanished family. But most grow up as nobody's child, their identity shaped as much by absence as by presence. In Borderlands, the question of identity is even more complicated. Here, allegiances can shift overnight. Today, your village is in France. Tomorrow, an English king claims it. Next week, it's back in local hands. One year you are a foreigner, the next a subject. The language you speak, the taxes you pay, even the saints you pray to, may all change with the whim of war or treaty. There are stories of villages that switch sides by moving the church bell from one tower to another, hoping the world will forget last week's loyalty. Historians debate how people coped with this endless uncertainty. Some say the fluidity bred resilience, a willingness to adapt, to form new ties, to seize opportunity wherever it appeared. Others see trauma, loss, mistrust, a constant anxiety about being proven to belong, or always at risk of being unmasked as outsider. Fringe cases are everywhere. In some port cities, sailors carry letters of passage, scribbled notes from a prior port, or tokens stamped by a sympathetic bailiff, meant to smooth their way at the next stop. Some find a welcome, others are turned away, their letter dismissed as a forgery, their accent branded suspicious. Pilgrims sometimes band together, inventing stories of shared origins, agreeing to vouch for each other in foreign markets or inns, a makeshift family for the road. Sometimes the only proof you need is survival. There are tales of people washed up on distant shores by shipwreck or war, unable to speak the local tongue, left to invent a new name, a new past, a new self. Over time, the stranger becomes a neighbour, the outcast, a curiosity, the orphan, someone's apprentice or adopted child. If you work hard, play your part, and stay out of trouble, you may one day belong. But you never forget the cost, the fear of a question you cannot answer, the ache of a name that no longer fits. And yet, amid all this flux and risk, there's a strange solidarity among outsiders. The stranger's inn is often the warmest, the outcast's story the richest. Newcomers bring songs, skills, and stories that become part of the local tapestry. Some of the greatest changes, the introduction of new crops, new crafts, new music, come not from those firmly rooted, but from those always on the move. Night deepens, and as you drift to sleep you wonder what it would feel like to arrive in a place where no one knows your name, where you're free to be anything or anyone. It's a terrifying thought, but also, just maybe, a hopeful one. Because in this medieval world where identity is never fixed, belonging is something you build day by day, in every choice, every risk, every story you dare to tell. In the swirl of masks and costumes, you glimpse a secret truth. For all the emphasis on birthright, witness and reputation, sometimes identity is just a matter of performance. You watch as a shy girl transforms into a fierce dragon, a nervous apprentice becomes a silver-tongued preacher, a grumpy shepherd tells the best jokes of the night. For these few hours, who you really are matters less than how well you play your part. Tomorrow, the masks will come off, and the world will snap back into its old shapes. But tonight, possibility reigns. Yet for some, these moments are not just play. They are lifelines. If you're a stranger, an outsider, or someone hiding a dangerous secret, festival time is a chance to slip through the cracks. A thief mingles with honest folk. A fugitive dances in plain sight. A forbidden lover wears a mask and steals a kiss in the dark. There are tales, equal parts history and folklore, of people who vanish into the festival crowd, never to be seen again, or who use the chaos to return home forgiven and remade. Historians still argue whether these carnivals of anonymity were safety valves or seeds of change. Some see them as harmless distractions, ways to let people taste forbidden fruit before returning, chastened to their chores. Others point to revolts, secret societies, and underground movements that grew from the temporary equality of the festival, proof that sometimes a night of masks can lead to a lifetime of rebellion. There's something else too, the anonymity of travel. Out on the high road far from home, you are whoever you claim to be. A merchant can pretend to be a pilgrim, a knight can pass for a monk, a runaway can invent a dozen new names before breakfast. In the bustling confusion of a city fair or a crowded inn, your old story drops away, replaced by the one you choose to tell. There's risk, of course. Someone might recognize your accent, your limp, your way of holding a cup. But for a little while, you get to experiment with who you might become. Quirky tidbits bloom in the moonlight. There are stories of masked balls in Florence where rivals dance together without knowing it, of green men and wild women leading revels through English woods, of night watchmen who can never be sure which mischief makers are really their own neighbours. In Paris, it's said, you can buy a mask that will let you wander for a whole night without being recognised, though you may wake up the next day with more friends or more enemies than you bargained for. Sometimes the anonymity is accidental. A thick fog rolls in, a stranger is mistaken for someone else, and for a moment, chaos reigns. There are tales of lost children found and restored to their families only because of a patch on their sleeve or the way they sing a lullaby. Lovers use the cover of night to escape or to meet, criminals to plot or to repent, the lonely to whisper hopes they'd never dare voice in daylight. But not all liminal moments are happy ones. For some, losing your identity, becoming anonymous, is a terrifying prospect. To be forgotten in the medieval world is to lose protection, inheritance, even a place to sleep. The threat of being erased, by exile, by shunning, by the simple fading of memory, is a fate feared as much as death. This is why communities hold on so fiercely to their rituals, their records, their stories. It's why you keep telling your children about the night you met the Green Man, the day the Lord wore a beggar's cloak, or the festival when everyone danced until sunrise. Historians point out that the very act of recording, whether in the priest's ledger, the guild's book, or the village gossip, emerges from this fear of erasure. Memory is life, and forgetting is a kind of death. So every mask, every feast, every wild night is followed by the slow, careful process of stitching people back into their stories. The mask is set aside, the real name spoken, and the community reclaims its own. Yet even in the most careful communities, anonymity persists at the edges. There are always those who slip away, by choice or by chance, whose names fade from the rolls, whose stories become rumours or legends. Sometimes you envy them, sometimes you pity them, but you always remember, in this medieval world, to be known is to exist, and to be unknown is to risk vanishing altogether. As dawn creeps in and the revellers sleep, you stretch, smiling at the memory of last night's wild freedom. The world is returning to its old shapes. The Lord is the Lord again, the cobbler, the festival queen just the miller's daughter. But the afterglow lingers, and you carry a little more courage, a little more empathy for those who walk the edges, wear the masks, or keep a secret name. Identity, you realise, is never finished. It's a patchwork, a procession, a long night's dance of memory and invention. Sometimes it's given to you, sometimes you seize it, sometimes you create it in a fleeting moment of courage or joy, and always it is as fragile and as resilient as the people who carry it. You fall asleep at last, feeling the gentle weight of belonging and the wild freedom of possibility settle over you like a cloak. Whatever tomorrow brings, you know that, in this world without papers or passports, your true proof is written in memory, community, and the stories you dare to live and tell.